Muy bien, muy bien.
Okay, right. Welcome everybody to this session webinar on system dynamics in transportation. We've got a number of different elements today that we want to share with you all. So organised by the System Dynamics Society Special Interest Group in Transportation. And for the last 6 years, we've tried to do an annual workshop and meeting to get together to discuss system dynamics in transportation. Our first few were actually in person, but we've been online for obvious reasons the last couple of years, and hopefully we will be able to do an in-person one again going forward. But I'm really pleased for everyone who's able to join with us today. If you haven't already, I've put a little icebreaker into the chat just to tell us a bit about where you've come from, why you're here today. Fill in that anytime throughout the presentation. I'll come back to it later as well, but just to give you the early results so you know who else is in the call with us today. We've got the majority of people coming here just to engage with the System Dynamics Society Special Interest Group in Transportation, but we've also got quite a large amount of people here specifically for the sessions on consultancy and from the PhD students. The majority of people I've got either intermediate or advanced knowledge of system dynamics. So we were expecting that people would already be working in this area, but welcome to anyone who is more of a novice, that we have got someone here who's fundamental. We did just do a session with the Association for European Transport on an introduction. So anyone who's joined us straight from that session and is new to system dynamics is special welcome to you. In terms of level of experience of transport, everyone seems to be from a transport background. We've got most people advanced, and we've even got some experts in the room as well. So looking forward to engaging with you. The majority of people are academic and research, and we've also got our consultancy in people here today as well. We've got everyone here is from Europe at the moment. We are in a European time zone, so we often do find that. Sometimes we do get people from other regions, and may well see they join throughout the session. And then for our little question on what comes first, the chicken or the egg, at the moment it's 100% agreed between the respondents that it is the chicken that comes first rather than the egg. So we can reflect on that in terms of causal loop diagrams if we wish later, and I'll check back in and see if anyone's went for the egg. So just to give you a bit about the Transportation Special Interest Group before we get started, we actually are a relatively new interest group in terms of the System Dynamics Society. It was just November 2016 that we were formally recognised by the ST Society, and since then we've been doing various events, including ones such as these and the in-person workshops. We've also done a series of webinars. We've edited a special edition of the Journal of Simulation, as well as we've got involved with putting a system dynamics thread into the European Transport Conference and a transport thread into the International System Dynamics Society Conference. So at the end of this session, we're actually going to be talking about those things that we've done over the past year and going forward. So we really like you all to stay and engage within that. So the idea is that we want to network between people who are using system dynamics in transport, share our experiences and best practices, and collaborate as well going forwards. To give you a background on who the people that keep this running, there's myself and Simon Shepherd, who are both based at the Institute for Transport Studies in University of Leeds in the UK. We've got Enzo Bivona, who is at the University of Palermo. Perifin Jitrapriam, who is based at Radboud University. Perifin actually led on our webinar series that we had last year, and he might be here later on to tell us a bit about how they went. And then finally from BOKU in Vienna, also the Institute of Transport Studies, we have Paul Pfaffenbichler and Astrid Guneman, who've been involved since the start of the society. Paul's actually leading on our ETC contribution this year. And Astrid is going to be chairing our panel discussion later on. So just in terms of what we're doing today, we're going to start with a session on the use of system dynamics in transport consultancy. I'd like to really thank our three speakers who've agreed to join with us today: Mike Costello from STEER, Martijn Ledgen from Goudappel, and Karim Onzi from WSP. These are all consultancies that have engaged with Transport SIG events before. I know that from STEER we had Mike's predecessor present at our first workshop actually about their work. Martijn's actually been involved in one of the papers that was in our special issue of the Journal of Simulation, and Goudappel presented at some of our ETC events. And I know WSP have also presented at both our webinars and in the ETC conference sessions as well. So we've had this engagement. It's great to see this use of system dynamics in the real world, I suppose, because a lot of us involved in this SIG are actually based in academia. So we're much more on the research focus rather than working directly with clients. So really looking forward to hearing from you all today. And we're going to follow their presentations with a panel discussion around that subject. I'll give you a quick comfort break after that to grab a tea, coffee, water of your choice. And then we're going to move on to some presentations from PhD students. So we've got two PhD students presenting today who are using system dynamics methods. And it's always great to engage with PhD students, and sometimes we've had master's students as well, and to ensure that they carry on the system dynamics once they go into their professional careers after their PhD's finished. We'll finish up the session today with our T-SIG business, which, as I say, I'd like to welcome everyone to join, get involved in what we do. We're really looking forward to collaborating going forward, and also discuss about maybe an in-person meeting next year, and what activities we'd be interested to see there. Throughout the session, if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat. And we can field them at the end of each of the presentations. So in the first session, we'll have questions and answers for each of the individual speakers after each of their presentations. And then we'll have the wider discussion straight afterwards. So without any further delay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will invite our first speaker, Mike Costello from STEER Group, to tell us about their work in system dynamics.
Right, sorry. So unfamiliar with Zoom, I was muted. Sorry about that. So hello everyone. My name is Mike Costello. I work for STEER, a consultancy that specialises in support websites, cities, infrastructure and transport. I'm going to talk to you about a model that we use, which is based in system dynamics. It's called the urban dynamic model. Just to follow up on something just occurred to me when you were giving that introduction. You say most people here, I think, are from academia and being from consultancy. I think one of the main things that comes to my mind about the difference is that we're always usually constrained by time and budget, and being required to deliver something at a certain level of quality. So it's that project management triangle. So I think if anyone has any questions about how come we did it this way and not this way, usually the answer is because of time and or budget, and that it met the certain level of quality that was required. So I guess a little get out of jail free card up front. Right, so let's start. You can see my slides. Yeah, okay, right.
Yeah.
On Okay, so quick contents, a little introduction. Then I'm going to talk about sort of the principal dynamics within the UDM, the urban dynamic model. Talk a little bit about model setup, its use, a little bit about working with clients, and then we'll finish up with a summary at the end. Hopefully that will be enough to fill the time. I added this slide to this deck recently. I was perusing the Department for Transport Analysis Guidance documentation here in the UK, and there was this paragraph here which I thought summarised what a land use transport interaction model is, which is what the urban dynamic model is. So some of you are probably familiar with transport models. I don't know how many of you are familiar with LUTI models, as we call them. As it says here, while a transport model requires inputs of land use which are being forecast exogenously, land use LUTI models generate their own forecasts of land use dependent on input policies and the changes in accessibility brought about by conditions on the transport system. So that kind of leads to this slide, which is kind of an overview of the system, if you like, that we're trying to represent. It starts at the top there. If you think about attractiveness of a location, as that increases or decreases, the number of households and businesses in the location will change. That will impact on transport demand, which affects the system performance, transport system performance, which in turn affects accessibility, and which in turn affects attractiveness of location. So I guess linking back for those of you in the previous AET presentation, I think it's the right name. I think we've got a causal loop diagram there, which probably add some pluses and minuses and things to it. But we've got a split there between kind of the land use side and the transport side, and the aim of this model is to try and bring those two things together. So just a little bit of an introduction. What is the urban dynamic model, or the UDM as we call it? Well, it's a model based on system dynamics, and that's why we're here, and it's run in Benson. It's a transport and land use model, so we're concerned about feedback between those two systems, and also kind of the how that progresses through time. It's partially inspired by Forrester's urban dynamics. Few differences though. For example, the original Forrester's model wasn't disaggregated spatially. It was all one zone. Obviously, we don't do that. We have many zones. It's a strategic model. So it's looking at the big picture. We're looking at the impact. We're not looking at the impacts of, say, a new cycle lane or a changing of some timings, signal timings on a junction. We're looking at what happens if a new interurban rail system is created. What happens if a new light rail system in a city is created? It's a simulation through time, as I mentioned. So we're interested in the trajectory of variables and their impact, and the impact of policies over time. We usually compare a do minimum to a do something. We run the model for around 20, 30, 40 years. And just an example chart there on the right hand side. This is showing number of jobs in a zone in a particular industry, comparing a do minimum and a do something. A new policy has been, probably a new transport policy has been introduced around year 25, and we've seen an increase in employment compared to the do minimum. Just finally, there we mostly use the model with public sector in the UK, although we have started to see some use in the USA as well. Okay, so the principal dynamics. This is kind of an overview of what goes into the model. And I'm going to break it down into components and just kind of go through it. Not going to go into any detail about maths and things, but it's just meant to give an overview of what's within the scope of the model. I'll put that slide in. Right. So look at household location. Well, actually, just before I say that, I guess it's four modules. This household location, business location, land, and transport. So those are the four things I want to talk about. So from a household location point of view, if we start from this attractiveness as a place to live, if we think about a zone, whether it's attractive as a place to live or not, that's driven by whether There's jobs accessible to the people who live there, and kind of the cost of housing in the area. As attractiveness changes, that will drive net inward migration. So that's people moving in minus people moving out. So that's kind of your stock, which is the workforce. As the workforce increases, that will affect house prices in the area. As in migration changes, that will affect house building, which affects the housing stock. The accessible jobs, which is one of the main things driving the attractiveness of the place to live, is a function of the businesses in the area which are needing jobs to be filled, and also the transport costs. So the cost of like traveling between work and home. Then the opposite side of that relationship, if you like, is the business location side. So attractiveness as a business location. So this can you see my yeah, okay. So attractiveness as a business location is driven by whether there's an accessible workforce of people to fill jobs that the business needs, access to other businesses, whether markets and suppliers. Both those things are driven by transport costs. As the attractiveness of location changes, I forgot to mention the rents, the cost of locating in a particular area will also drive attractiveness. As that attractiveness changes, we get a net flow of businesses, which drives our stock of businesses in the area, with the businesses in the area driving the rents and the businesses, the demand from businesses driving the demand for new construction, and hence the premises stock. Is the land element. So land is also a stock. To be able to build houses and build business premises, we need land to be available. As premises and housing is built, the land stock is depleted, and so the supply of stock affects the rents, which again feeds back into the attractiveness of a place to live, which you mentioned earlier. Finally, we have the transport element. So up at the top there, we have the transport supply, which can be changed by transport investment. So transport investment can increase or decrease the increase or decrease the travel times or travel costs. The transport costs then drive the accessible businesses, accessible workforce, accessible jobs. Then as those accessible jobs, accessible workforce increases, we see increases in sort of people living in the area, increase in the workforce, increases in businesses, which will have effects on transport demand, which then feeds back into the transport costs. So, you know, any transport investment that reduces, increases capacity or reduces travel time could then be outweighed by increased demand as more people move into the area, whether that be businesses or workforce. And then just putting it all together, that's kind of the boundaries of the system that we're working in. I'll tell you a little bit about how we build the model. So we divide the geography into zones. This is an example from a model we built for transport for the north, which actually covers the whole of the north. And then each zone we fill them in inverted commas with information about the kind of the household population side and the businesses jobs side. So on the housing side, it's housing units which occupy land. They contain households. We have the households, which are groups of population that live in housing and have a preference for a certain type of housing. The population then belongs to households, and they're the people that make trips within the model, and they have a skill level which is used to match up to job skill requirements. So the subset of the population forms the workforce. On the flip side of that, we have the business side. Business premises occupy land, contain businesses. Businesses have jobs which need to be filled by the workforce, and businesses generate trips to other businesses. And the jobs belong. Each business has a number of jobs that it needs to be filled, and each business type has a different skill mix requirement between the low skilled and highly skilled workforce. So we filled the zones with data. All the zones are connected with generalized journey times, made up of times and fares and the usual components of generalized journey time. There's 4 modes: road, rail, bus, and active mode. Depending on the version of the model that we're using, we can represent road congestion and rail crowding in the travel time basically increase as congestion and crowding increases. So that's kind of thinking back to what I was saying earlier about increased demand can work against your transport investment. So zoning system, data for the zones and transport costs between them. We'll then calibrate a base year where the model isn't moving through time, which we're trying to make the trip distributions and the workforce job match data in terms of people who travel to work. So basically calibrating the flows between the different your trip ends. So imagine it's a large gravity model. You've got households, businesses, and we're calibrating those trips between the two. We then run the model through time, and to make sure it aligns with population and employment forecasts. And then we'll run a bunch of response tests on the models, basically, change some travel time, particular mode, see what the response is, compare it to some data in the literature, some data obviously about elasticities, with some recent studies on increases in employment in response to transport, which we've been using lately. And at that point, so the model is ready to use. Some main inputs and outputs our inputs are changes in transport supply over time and changes in land available over time, by mode, and the land is by business or housing type. We'll run the model for circa 40 years, depending on which model it is, whether it's big or small. It can take about a minute per year. And then we're usually interested in the outputs we're interested in are changes to people, changes to employment, and changes to transport in terms of demand and mode share. Just looking at the time, we're okay. Example outputs, the usual Bensim. I'm assuming people on this call might be familiar with Bensim. You get your usual tables and your charts. But you can also export data and map things in GIS. You can also do some what I think are clever things in Excel. It's not something I've come across before. So when I was showing this, I was like, oh, that's good. So basically drawing some maps in Excel. And how the output's used, why would you use the model? Generally, it's to help decision makers with strategic / transformational decision making. What are the possible impacts of this large scheme, including wider economic impacts? What's the impact of this scheme versus that scheme? What potential impacts arose that we didn't foresee? And also kind of what if sort of scenarios planning, particularly recently with the, at least in the UK, the DFT common analytical scenarios, sort of different backgrounds in which to test schemes. Just a quick note on wider economic benefits. So 3 levels. Level 1 usually comes from regular transport models. Level 2 can be readily calculated and assumes fixed land use. Level 3 benefits assumes land use can change, and it's in that context we tend to use this model. So how's it been used in different ways? So a couple of things to mention here. We can build the model at sort of different levels of complexity. You can have small models, a few zones, less parameters, runs quicker, versus a model with more zones, more detail, takes longer to run. We've just looking at the bottom there on the adaptability, a couple of interesting things we've done. On the right hand side, we sort of expanded the model for a particular client to measure things which perhaps you wouldn't relate to transport and land use. An example being if you know sort of a volume of water that a household may use per time period, the model can tell you number of households you have over time, and then with using that parameter, you can then make an estimate of changes in water demand. So it's kind of linking it to sort of some environmental elements. Second one there says about San Francisco. We had a client in the US who wanted a simple, so they were doing some analysis of options for a large scheme. They had a large transport model being built, but they wanted to do some option testing ahead of that. So we actually used the transport side of the transport model. We held land use constant and used the transport side of this model to do some quick option testing, and the client was pleased with that. We may have some follow-on work following on from that. The other way we've adapted the model is to sort of put it online, relatively small version, running in Vensim, being hosted somewhere, and then you access it via a browser. That's a link there at the top if you want to go and have a go at this demo version. Basically, it's giving you a problem to solve. These like 3 challenges. You've got 3 potential problems to solve, only a limited amount of resources to do it, and you have to make some choices between what things you want to change. So it's kind of used as a demo version. We did use a live version of this with a particular client in a kind of a workshop, so give them some ideas of how you get to trade off one thing versus another, given your fixed budget. Just talking of clients, some examples of people who've worked with Transport for North, Transport for South East are our current sort of ongoing clients. Nice couple there from the US, the MBTA in Maryland. I'm just aware of time, so I'm just going to be quick on these last couple. Got 2 slides to go. So working with clients, I've noticed over my time sort of move from what I call in my mind output focused clients to method focused. Previously, clients were just we would host and run a model for them, and we would then advise them on how to use it, what the outputs meant, that kind of thing. We've now seen people sort of become more involved in the actual process itself. They want to host and run the model themselves. They know what they want in terms of features and functions, and they ask us lots of questions. So just to finish up, it's UDM, it's a simulation, uses system dynamics, concerned with how transport, population, employers, and land use interact over time. Typically apply it to large areas. I'm used to test transport and land use strategies, usually for large transformational changes. Outputs are in terms of people, employment, travel patterns, development, that sort of thing. Generally used for, the 2 main ways we've used recently are for sort of scenarios, testing scenarios, and quantifying wider economic benefits. And that's the end.
Great, thanks, Mike, and well done on keeping the spot on time. I've seen the extended, more detailed version of this that you presented to our students early in this year. So you've done well to summarise it in such a succinct way. Really interesting work, and we've got quite a few questions in the chat. So I'll read out the questions, but then if the questioner wants to add anything, they're welcome to join in. So your first one, which is from Lawble, who they use SD in car rental. They've asked, can you guarantee a minimum of measurable results for your work? The main thing interesting any client.
I don't read the question myself.
I don't know, Laurel, if you want to expand on that.
You want to see a minimum of measurable results for your client to maintain interest in the client. I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, but if we can elaborate.
Yeah, maybe it's around because obviously working in consultancy, your clients will be wanting something sort of fairly concrete coming out to make a decision on. What do you advise when a client asks that, when they say, am I going to get a definitive result here?
Well, my answer to that would be no, you're not going to get a definitive result because it's a model, and all models are wrong, some models are useful. So it's meant to guide decision making. It's also, as I say, it's a strategic model, so there are simplifications made to allow us to develop and to implement a model in time available the client has and the budget that they have. So we have to make certain simplifications, so that can drive, how confident you are in the results. So that's generally why we say it's a strategic model. We're looking at the wider, the bigger picture, not sort of individual localized issues. So yeah, so it's kind of it's a guide. It's not, doesn't give you the answer. It guides you to help make a decision. Yeah,
and that's a common thing that comes up with any type of modeling, that you've got a responsibility that your client or the end user realizes that it's not a crystal ball as such. Question from Marco: are the work zones also differentiating to levels of skill?
Well, it's not the zone, so it's the workforce lives in zones. They have a skill level. The businesses, which are also in zones, have jobs that they need to fill at a particular skill level, and we match the two. So somebody who's a highly skilled person will fill a highly skilled job. So it's not a function of the zone; it's a function of the businesses which are in the zone. But yeah, that skill level is on kind of both sides of the equation. That answers the question.
Yeah, I'm assuming as Marco hasn't popped up that was answered. So on the next one, another one from Laurel: do you participate in the analysis of the models and their implementations?
Me personally, yes. So I guess I'm what we call the market lead for this product, if you like, that we sell to clients. So it's my responsibility to make sure we deliver these models to time, to budget, to quality, and make sure that we've got the right number of people to do the task required to set up the model. So that in a way, one of the things we want to do is make the setup of the model repeatable, so that we can, do the same thing over and over. It sounds like negative, but and train people to do that and to understand the process they're doing, and so that we can, build a model to time and budget to right levels of quality. So yeah, I mean, I started off being the person who helped build the model. Now I'm kind of overseeing other people building it.
Great. Next question from Atsushi: how do you assume the parameter of elasticity for wider economic impact? Is it constant over the simulation period?
Wider economic impacts are calculated from numbers of jobs and how close those jobs are. So it's a function of employment and travel time, travel accessibility, depends how you want to say, between those jobs. So jobs will change over time due to growth, due to changing transport inputs or any policy that you're testing. So no, it won't be constant over the simulation period, and usually not my area of expertise. So if I say this correctly, that's that you usually take the value from each year, sum it up, and do take the present value of it. So it's a function of the wider economic impact in each year.
Okay. And the last one that we've got in the moment is from Marco. Does the output allow for equality or equity analysis along different groups, not only geographical?
Yeah, yes and no. Depends what you want. It's an aggregate model. We segment the people side by income levels and skill levels, and then on the job side, these businesses will require people of certain skills, so you can kind of see the impact on certain groups. The reason I'm kind of hesitating is in that work we did in the US, there's a lot of focus on this equity, and it didn't quite meet the needs of what they were looking for. But it was good enough for the sort of initial model. So it does something, but it may not do exactly what everyone might want it to do. But that's the kind of function of the cost, also the cost and the time to build the model, and etc. etc.
Yes, that level of disaggregation, I know one that I've looked at before, and colleagues have, and it often ends up being an ex-ante analysis rather than something within the model. But I've just to plug it, I've got a PhD student who's actually looking at how we can put fairness into these types of models. So watch this space. Maybe she'll be presenting on that next year and give you some ideas.
Okay, right, yeah, interesting.
So do we have any more questions? If anybody wants to just speak up if they've got a question, Mike has another few minutes in their slot if there is anything to follow up. Astrid, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, firstly, thank you for a very interesting presentation, and I must admit we use your online model in our teaching as well.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Nice
Right.
thing. So if you get access from Vienna, that's us maybe.
So it's interesting you say that, because we have to pay for the model to be hosted, and I need to make the business case for it to be for it to continue to be hosted. So I don't know if you could drop me an email afterwards. I'd be interested to know what you're using it for. That will help with that. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Oh, you're muted, Astrid.
Oh, okay, sorry. No, it was just we will do that. And our question, or my question, is one of the big issues we have in planning is that each local authority do their own decisions on planning permissions, and they're not necessarily rational. So to model those, where the jobs go and how the accessibility is not easy, because it can be singular decisions. So I was wondering if you have the same problem, or if it over time just evens out and is accurate enough that you can reasonably calibrate your model. So where do, for example, development goes is not necessarily a rational decision here.
Yeah, so I think this pretend, well, I'll tell you two things, and you can tell me if it answers the question. So what we do with this model is, rather than saying where development happens, we tell it where land is available for it to happen, and then the model decides, in inverted commas, whether that gets developed or not. So there's kind of a decision to be made when you're implementing the model as to whether we say we want the model to hit future forecasts for, say, 2050. Therefore, we need to give it enough land and adjust the parameters, whatever, so that it hits the 2050 and the trajectory over time. And another option is to say, well, given that we're giving the model all this land and it's not reaching the levels of growth of the forecast, what does that mean? Does that mean, like, is is there something in the model which is causing it and needs fixing, or is it a case of, well, it's something we've not thought about? You know, the forecasts say that we get lots of jobs in this particular zone, but there's no plan to increase the accessibility of that zone, and therefore a lot of businesses don't move into it, and therefore the jobs don't occur. Again, and then the sort of second point, I guess it's kind of linked, is that, you know, with depending on the scale of the model, if we're building a model for a smaller scale area, the client can provide us with information about where that land will become available. Like, there's going to be some housing development in this zone, there's going to be some business development in this zone, and then we can use sort of that so that the model puts the growth into those zones. Yeah, but I guess sometimes it depends on the scale of the model. If you're doing a large strategic model where, you know, a town is split into, you know, 3 zones or something, a centre and 3 zones around it, then, you know, you've got mixed use of your zones, and I suppose you'd have to consider how you're going to use that, because it might not be useful for planning purposes if you've got mixed or heterogeneous zones. Don't know if does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Super. Well, thank you very much, Mike. And there'll be a chance to pick up on anything again in the panel discussion after all of the presentations.
Can I just mention on the panel discussion, I do need to drop off for 5 minutes, but I'll join again. That's okay?
Yeah. We'll see you in a bit, Mike.
Okay.
So I'd like to now invite our next consultancy speaker, which is Martin Lejeune from Goudappel.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, thank you.
And can you now see my slides as well?
Yes, I can see your PowerPoint and I can see your full screen now. So you're good to go.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, today I would like to go through answering this question here, of which you all know the answer, of course: how to deal with deep uncertainty in policymaking. And the answer to that question is system dynamics. My name is Martijn Lejeune. I work for a consultancy firm in the Netherlands, Goudappel. I added a slide here. I saw there were some Dutch participants, but for the ones who don't know us, here some very brief comments. What we do here in the Netherlands is we translate trends and data into useful advice as a base for mobility policies and transport plans. Strong focus is on passenger mobility there, but a little bit we work more and more on logistics as well. We have 300 experts in-house, and each with their own talent there: traffic engineers, architects, behavioral scientists, psychologists, public transport specialists, and software developers. So also we make a lot of traffic models. And in collaboration with partners abroad, we also advise outside of the Netherlands, in Belgium, Germany, Italy, Sweden, and the United States. Collaborate a lot with academia. And we have our own innovation lab. So since we are a consultancy, we need clients to do our work. But because we have our own innovation lab, we spend actually quite a big part of our profit onto this innovation lab. And this is used to develop system dynamics models within our company. So I would like to explain a little bit more on that today. The background is that we are living in a rapidly changing world. We all know that climate change is picking up and becoming more important, but also think about digitization, rise of the East. Something that's not even mentioned here is the war that's going on between Ukraine and Russia. So there's many things changing the world, which we do not really have a grasp on. So we don't really know how that would impact our decisions in the future. And if we translate that also to a local scale, in this case, you see an example of municipalities or regions that have spatial ambitions. They want to include digitization, for example, smart mobility, to develop a more sustainable or a more efficient region. And smart mobility could provide solutions to do so. But then the impact assessment of smart mobility is rather complex. For example, in a traffic model, we then calculate a base scenario, a reference scenario, a do-nothing scenario. And on top of that, we add 1 or 2 scenarios based on the assumptions on how smart mobility could be utilized. So a lot of assumptions are put into a large scenario. And then in a lot of detail, it's going to be calculated what the impact of it is on the road network. But all of these assumptions combined basically have the possibility of 0 that it will actually happen. So this method doesn't provide all the answers we want. The input scenarios we use, in the Netherlands, we use WLO scenarios that determine how our future is expected to look like. They do not take into account everything. One important part that's missing is, for example, development of tourism. And what is unknown is often also ignored. If you want to be certain about how the future looks like, you neglect uncertainty. Yeah, then you have a rather certain idea of how it could look like, but yeah, a small chance that it will actually happen. You can develop bandwidths, what's expected with a top and a bottom scenario, but what is actually realistic within these bandwidths, and how plausible is the ambitions we set. And to dive into more detail there, I would like to go back a long time on how we used to make policies. Policies were based on extrapolation of historical trends. That's called predict and provide. The predict means we take the year 2020, we go back a certain amount of years. There you recognize a trend, and based on this trend, you predict a growth of mobility towards the future, as shown in the figure here. And then the provide part is that you build infrastructure to facilitate this predicted demand. And this could lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy, because is this the future you want? If you predict the growth of mobility, or even make it predict a growth of car mobility, and accordingly you're going to provide that, then obviously you would facilitate this growth of car mobility, which might be unwanted in the future. So this could also lead to fragile decisions if the future trends are not according to the trend you explored, and you want to break historical trends. So therefore, we plan to go towards vision and validate instead of predict and provide. Vision and validate means that you determine a desired vision of the future. The baseline scenario, the reference could still be there, but that's maybe different from your vision. And the part in between that we can call policy. So you determine a desired vision of the future that deals, for example, with urbanization or climate goals that you have. And then continuously you validate if you are on the right track. You make continuous adjustments, and that needs adaptive policies. And here it's called in Dutch transitiepad, means transition path from the base, the current situation, towards this vision. And this could lead to breaking trends, behavioral change, but also to uncertainty. And therefore we started to develop system dynamics models, because we wanted to do 2 things basically. One is to explore and develop internally consistent scenarios for strategic policy development. This could be input into the traditional transportation models, the ones that I just explained that maybe do not deal with all the uncertainties we want to deal with. And you can determine desired future scenarios with or without personas that help resilient planning. And this helps to understand transitions over time. You don't just think about the situation in the future, but also how to reach this goal and how in order to reach this future goal, because it develops over time. And the second one is that by visualizing all the factors that impact the system, also in the causal loop diagram that's been shown in the presentation before, that helps in, for example, a workshop or with stakeholders to explore the relationship between cause and effects in the future outcomes. So also there, yeah, you can figure out what to do now to reach your future goals, and this should be easily adaptable to test different assumptions. We do not set in stone the input of the model. The whole advantage of system dynamics is that it's easily, it runs quickly. So if you want to change your assumptions because somebody has a different opinion or there's new information available, you can change the input and rerun the model, and just in a matter of seconds you have new results. So this really helps to explore cause and effects and how they interact with each other. And if you translate this to a handy dashboard, I'll show that later as well. You can really see the cause and effects and immediately see the change of different assumptions. The current applications we have for this is in the metropolitan region of Rotterdam and The Hague. And there we explore the long-term impact of COVID on public transport ridership. This is caused by changing in teleworking, but also a change in comfort and the supply of public transportation. And in there, we make an extension for different area types or target groups or different travel motives that could be explored. Additionally, we just started in the municipality of Tilburg in the south of the Netherlands to go beyond the scenarios that are input in traffic models. We take into account more uncertainties in which we also think about the broad prosperity or inclusivity in the scenarios. And then for the Ministry of Infrastructure, we develop models to determine the expected usage of shared mobility. So that's very much a behavioral model in which we explore what the reasons are to use shared mobility and what can we expect in the future. And the challenges we see here is how to together determine the causal relationship that needs a lot of discussion. And the group model building part is a very strong advantage here. And by collaborating closely with our clients, we can create trust and robustness. And by connecting empirical data to continuously update the results, we could stabilize the model. When we apply system dynamics into practice, we go through a few steps with our clients. Firstly, we decide on the scope, which starting points, assumptions, principles do we use, and then which policy interventions can our client use. Not everything is within their region to act. So what can they do and how can they change the system is what we determine in the beginning, and also what they want as desired output or outcomes. Then we take the model back and extend the model based on the scope. We distinguish different target groups as wanted, and we can define the variable assumptions or the uncertainties based on literature or previous studies. And as a third step, so rather late in the process, actually, we start calculating. Normally with the use of traffic modeling, you start calculating much earlier in the process, but here the process focused a lot on collaborating with clients. But when we calculate, we test many different possibilities in the assumptions or policy interventions, and it could result in thousands and thousands of runs. And in these huge variety of runs, we can determine which from the possible outcomes we determine as desired. Then you can connect what you want to reach in the future to what has been used as an input into these models. And as a result, you get insight into the relations between cause and effects in alternative scenarios and bandwidths to explore possibilities in mobility. And that helps our clients what to do now to reach our future goals. So as a first step, you decide on the scope. I'm sorry that this is still a Dutch image, but it explains that we focus on passenger mobility. The model split, congestion, and the number of trips are interrelated. And on the edge of the system, there are some policies: sustainability, public transportation policy, population development, economics, COVID. They are used into the model, but not impacted by the model. So they are on the edge of the system. But we can also connect more smart mobility, pricing, traffic safety, parking policies, etc. They are for now out of scope, but they're easy to connect to our current system. And how we apply this is shown in this case for the metropolitan region of Rotterdam and The Hague. We implemented COVID into the base model of our mobility system. So COVID means that we have settings with a certain duration, a start year, an end year, and an interval of COVID. You remember these waves we had a few years ago. Sometimes there were a lot of additional rules, sometimes there were not so much. So during these COVID waves, we changed our behavior, and that is translated to the amount of teleworking we do. The capacity of public transportation has been changed. Therefore, it's also became maybe more awkward to sit close to others in public transportation, and that impacts the value of time of public transportation. And also our trip generation as a whole is impacted, because we work more from home. On certain days we decided to go to the office, but also we take possibly extra trips to just take a short walk or a bike tour during your workday. And in here you see the entire model we have, and we add data on it. It's not important that you can read this, but it just explains that we have various modules that can be extended based on what we want to answer. And this base model we take with us to the client. It explains the basic science in mobility. And then you can add all these uncertainties, or you can change the assumptions that has been made in the previous model. And one of these assumptions is actually teleworking. In traffic models or in traffic scenarios, we could make an assumption on how much people do we expect to work at home in the future. But since COVID, we actually learned a lot more about that. Why do people work at home? When do they work at home? Do they have the option to work at home actually? So instead of the assumptions and the expected teleworking numbers, we can model different user groups, such as early adopters and imitators, to go back to the office. And this is based on innovation diffusion theories. So this is a great example where you can use existing theories and change it to our current practice. And therefore, you can replace the assumptions that have been made before, and therefore extending your model to get more insight into what could be uncertain in the future, and get a grasp on how to change people's behavior and how that impacts our mobility system. And then before I said that we have many different model outcomes, and that is shown by the figure here. This is a fictional example of the model split for cars. We test different variations in assumptions and decide the desirable future. So what you see here is a starting year. So there, the bandwidth of the results is not so large yet, but the further you go to the future, the bandwidth could increase, because you have all these uncertainties and what can people do, the options. The longer you model it to the future, the wider your bandwidth could become. So if for example, a municipality has a goal to get 20% less car usage compared to now, we can look to the future and say, okay, 20% car use, that's approximately here. So we draw a line in all the model outcomes, and all the ones that are below this 20% less car use, that are determined as our desired scenarios. And then we want to know which elements have most influence on reaching this goal. So what are the preconditions for success? So what our tool can do is it combines all the model runs that we determined as desirable, and then analyzes what were the assumptions in these model runs that make sure that you reach your success. And another test you can do is what makes our goal fail. So all the model runs in the top here, they do not reach the goal of 20% less car use in this case. So it's also important to look at them to see, okay, so this is resulting in a future we do not want. How is that possible? So what do we need to limit? And how to get an insight into the cause and effects is by developing a dashboard in this case. We developed this dashboard so far internally, but through you, Gillian, I can keep you up to date on when we can publish this. And then it's also easier to play a little bit with what happens if, for example, we are still living in a world with COVID, or when the prices for fossil fuels are doubling. So all these uncertainties we want to put into the dashboard. So it's actually fairly easy to play with these extreme scenarios that we did not take into account when we developed scenarios for our future. And in these results, we can also distinguish in different travel uses, travel motives, different trip lengths. So there you can really zoom in to your target groups. And that helps on which groups do you need to focus on when making policies. So then here we go to my last slide, is how to manage mobility policies for the futures, is that you have to determine together how do we want the future to look like. If you can make a nice goal on how you want the future to look like, then you can find a path that is able to reach this goal. And on that path, you need to know which factors influence this desired futures. And if you know these two things, you can come up with appropriate policies to realize these desired futures. And on the right side, there's a few sample applications that are hopefully familiar. We did not explore all of that yet, but with rather simple modifications to our model and in collaboration with clients, we can extend our model. So also that has been my goal for today, to hopefully find people who recognize this challenge and want to develop this together with us. Thank you for your attention. I did not look at the chat. Are there any questions? Back to Gillian.
Thanks, Max, and really interesting stuff. I know a few people have been working on similar areas, the resilience to COVID. I'm looking more at the other end of that, of then how COVID and public transport then affects public health as well. So there's lots of crossover around there. Now, I think we've got one question in the chat so far, which is the same question that we had to Mike previous from Normal about guaranteeing a minimum measurable results for your clients, and what's your participation in the analysis and implementation?
Yeah, I can start with the second part of the question. Me personally, yes, I participate in the analysis of the models and their implementations, but that's because everybody participates. We have a team that both know how to develop the software, how to build the dashboard, but also with the people who make the policies. We all develop the model together. Although we developed the base of this model already before, but with what we want to know and what uncertainties or assumptions we use, it's very transparent. So yes, everybody is participating in the analysis of the models and their implementations. And then the first part of the question I find more difficult to interpret. A minimum of measurable results for the work. But that's because we develop a bandwidth with possibilities. And if somebody is not agreeing with the assumptions we use, then we can change the assumptions. And therefore we extend the bandwidth. And the strength of this is actually into developing many different model runs. And then translate back from a desired future to what input has been used, and therefore you figure out what to do now to reach your desired future. Is this answering the question, or did I maybe not understand it?
I think that seemed like it answered. I've seen next we had Marco has their hand up.
Yeah, on the question of participating in model making, I have had the privilege of watching this modeling efforts of Goudtappel in action in the Tilburg region. The fun thing also is that by having those municipalities participate in this process of defining the parameters and the assumptions themselves and discussing them, you see that the acceptance of the model output and also the understanding of the limitations of such models is in general much greater than when you just do a turnkey traffic model exercise. So I would like to add that to Martijn's contribution. Thank you.
Thanks, Marco. And we have a message in the chat from Milos. How have practitioners in the Netherlands responded to these models in general? And did you have a chance to work with some folks outside of the Netherlands? And are there differences in perspectives on this kind of modeling?
Thank you. It's a very good question. How they responded, that's actually one of our major challenges so far. The people who like to take a risk on this new type of traffic modeler, they respond very well, and they are very happy with all the insights. And also with what Marco just explained, you can like really, you developed your policies together. So there is a lot of, I lost the word for draagvlak. Marco, can you help me here?
I would say support.
Support, indeed. Yeah, there's a lot of support for the decisions that are made. But policymakers, they want to have certainty. They want to have a number and reach their goal. And also the time frame of a policymaker, it could be sometimes rather short, just 4 years, for example. So the results that we see is outside of their perspective to decide to make decisions. but we try to help them that it's not important to now choose A or B for the future, but say you can make adaptive policies and say you want to reach your goal. The 1 year it's important to do this, and then in the next year you need to change and adapt your policies, because that will make sure that you follow your path correctly. So to answer your question, we are struggling with it, but yeah, more and more policymakers are open-minded about this, and they see the benefits of being approximately right instead of being precisely wrong. So that's very helpful in this case. And no, we did not help work a lot abroad yet, but I think maybe in the next presentation of WSP we'll hear more about that.
Thanks, Martin. And we haven't got much time left, but Zenab was asking if you used exploratory modelling and analysis developed by Quackle and Proot, which I think is similar, at least, to the one of the images on your slides.
Yes, yeah, I performed my thesis together with them, and I took my knowledge to Goudappel.
Excellent. Good to see that cross transfer of knowledge. So just to finalise before moving on, we got a response from Laurel on your previous question. If I'm a client, I'm sure I suppose I want to be sure that the results will justify the money and time spent. And so as a consultancy, I suppose that is always the extra tightrope that you've got to walk, that your client is wanting their value for money. They might be wanting a particular result coming their way as well. Whereas in academia, we have a bit more flexibility, I guess, in that it's our own work and research questions generally, rather than a client that is asking for something. Yeah,
and we recognize that. Yeah, it's a challenge. If you know more about the future, then you also know more about what you don't know. But more and more people start to accept that they don't know everything, and that's very helpful.
That's the way forward indeed. Well, thank you very much, Martin, and look forward to hearing more from you in the panel discussion. But I would now like to invite our last speaker in this session, which is Karim Onzu from WSP.
Yes.
Hello.
So, hello. I'm new to Zoom. I don't really use it that much, so bear with me a bit so I can share my screen at the same time and be able to read my couple of notes that I have here. Where am I? Great. Perfect. Can you guys see my screen now? Maybe now.
Yes, we can see you on full screen.
Great. And yes, so here we go. Oh, thank you so much anyway for those presentations before me. It was very interesting to hear both of you and discuss how you guys work with the system dynamics. So today I will be presenting what we do here in WSP and how we first have developed a model in WSP, but also use system dynamics as a tool with our clients and partners. And so, first of all, I will just talk a bit of a background. I won't talk about very much about why the need of a new method. I think Martin did mention that quite a bit in his presentation, but I will add on a couple of points there. Then I will be talking about the model that we have developed here and its main components. And finally, I will just be presenting a couple of applications that we did within System Dynamics with a couple of our clients and partners. So just very briefly, just to summarize a bit, we all know now that traditional methods that we usually use just have we just do an extrapolation to create a sort of image of the future that we deem is most probable based on those historical trends and data that we have. We do some sensitivity analysis here and there just to see and to evaluate a bit more some uncertainties. But what I want to add here, what is very important, is the fact that the way there sometimes is quite uncertain. We just assume a linear extrapolation, which is usually not really the case, and it's quite representative with those lines over here. And this is very important when we are applying policy, especially today in a world where we have a lot of technological advancement, very fast very fast growing technologies are emerging as well. And so this affects quite a bit the transportation system and environment it operates in. So this is why for us, we at WSP, we've seen the need of a new method, and we've also decided to go with system dynamics. And so the way we've created this, the model that we have here, and the way we also work with our clients is usually with an interactive approach that it was also mentioned in the previous presentation, and we also do a bit the same here. Especially when we created our model here, we did a lot of workshops in the beginning to assess those trends and those components that we deem are quite important. We prioritized them and we created relationships between them. And after that, we started quantifying those relationships with function and values, but also the components as well. And it is also, after those workshops, we also complemented this with an extensive literature review of what is available, what it was available at the time about those new trends and mobilities. And this is a small sketch about our model here. We focus a lot on new mobilities and new trends within transportation, but we do take into consideration also traditional ways of traveling and doing a trip. So we've divided our model divided in three main groups. The first one is connected and automated vehicles. The second one is electric vehicles, and the third one is ride hailing. And it is important to note that those three groups are not independent from each other. They are interconnected. So I can give you an example here. If we focus on EV sales, we can look at the fact that it negatively affects car operational costs. So it decreases the cost, and then that will maybe lead to an increase, a decrease then also on ride hailing, and maybe then an increase in the number of trips. And you can see how electrical vehicle sales do affect how much people are willing to consider ride hailing as a mode to travel. And so it is important that this is a sketch and it's not static. We always strive to find new components to add, or also those relationships that we have, how can we improve them? And so in my next slide, I will just mention a couple of those lately adjusted components that we did within the last year, and also what we are considering doing in the future and the coming year. And so just for you guys to have a bit of more of an idea of what kind of components we worked on during the last year. The first one is a vehicle kilometer traveled, and before that, we assumed that connected and automated vehicle had the same pattern and generate the same amount of vehicle kilometer traveled. But lately, we've adjusted that in assuming that they produce higher VKT, and that is because we also did an assumption here that people may generate more trips because they are productive in those types of cars, and maybe driving is less of a waste of time than it was before. The second one is this congestion and traffic safety component that we have. And what we've added lately was the fact that we can, that it affects the average car travel time. So basically, more congestion will lead to a higher travel time for cars, which might then lead to a different mode share when we are calculating that within our model. The third one is emissions. We did add that lately, and today it takes into consideration the greenhouse gas emissions from internally combusted engine vehicles. And the fourth one is range anxiety within electric vehicles. So how how people are actually willing to, are people willing to buy an electric vehicle or not, and this anxiety that comes with it. And we also, originally it was only connected to the battery life of the car itself, but lately we've also included the availability of charging, how available are charging stations. Future components that we think are quite important to add is, the first one is teleworking. And this is an obvious choice after the pandemic and the way our traveling patterns have changed after that. And one of the main focuses is to see how this will affect the mode share in the future, and also emissions. We want to adapt it to also including the share of electricity that is used to charge electric vehicles that actually do not come from renewable resources. And the way we do that, I mentioned that a bit before, and it was also mentioned before in the previous presentation, is through collaboration, both internally with multiple workshop and multiple experts and colleagues, but also when we do that with our clients, is also we thrive into creating a model together through interactive learning, which we call here interactive learning, but it's actually workshops that we do, and we really want to push for those as much as possible in order for us to create trust within the model that we are building, but also in general within system dynamics, which is a tool that is not quite widespread within the transportation sector yet. And in order for us to create this trust and this robustness from the client themselves to be able to trust in that, is involving them from the beginning for them to give us also a lot of their input, their policies that they wanna test, the relationship between different components, how they perceive that. And this is quite important for us and for them, because then if we create a model that they don't really trust, this model will just sit in a drawer or in a folder on the computer, and it won't be developed and learned and used for good policy making in the future. And the way we do that, we have developed within WSP a sort of online interface. This is a very, very, how do you say that? I lost the word in English. It's rough. I don't know if that's the correct word, but it's not really detailed. It's quite general about some component that we deem important that we have in our main model in WSP, where we can tweak, use, and see how it will affect different type of outputs. So, for example, here you can see the fleet share in electrical vehicles and the fleet share in connected and automated vehicles, but we can also look at different type of outputs. So, for example, electric vehicle sales, emissions, all of those things can be looked at here in this interface that we usually use within our workshop to kickstart the model building process. And so without further ado, I will be talking now about some applications that we at WSP have done, both with the model that we've created, but also with System Dynamics as a tool, where we both created a model from scratch, or we based ourselves from the model within WSP to create and to refine and to improve or even make more detailed a certain component from it, which was important for the client. So the first one, the first project that we'll discuss is actually quite an interesting one where I was involved quite a bit. It was for Jernbanedirektoratet, which is the Norwegian Railway Directorate. And what we did there is that we created a system dynamics tool that was used as an underlying method to map the existing trends that we see, so historical data and trends that we have. but also new mobility trends as well. But what was interesting in that is that we also included some new trends that are quite hard to quantify, like, for example, the environmental concern. And it was some definition about that. It's the fact that people are more conscious about climate change and might opt then for more greener ways of traveling. And the way we quantified this was through machine learning. And it was really, really interesting in this project where we actually combined two types of methods that are quite new, that are not really in use today. And it was both system dynamics and machine learning, and seeing how those two interact with each other. And it was also mentioned a bit in the previous presentation, is when we have a client, as it was the case here with Yanmar and Dr. that it quite proactive, interested, open to those new types of method, it just creates even more trust within those new types. And it was also quite important here that they did understand from the beginning the limitations of system dynamics and also of machine learning, and the fact that the fact of this uncertainty, that we don't know everything. And it was really, really nice to see also from a client perspective, client that was quite understanding about that as well. The second project I will mention here is Trafikverket, which is the transport administration here in Sweden. And this project was a bit more straightforward, and it was basically that Trafikverket used to have a spreadsheet-based elasticity model that used to predict the effects of different electrification uptake in the system. And it was quite difficult for them to see relationship between different components, and also see the way the uptake is going to evolve over time. So what we suggested to them is to actually just translate this spreadsheet into a system dynamics model, in order for us to be able to see more clearly and visually the relationship between those different components. But additionally to that, we did include some hard to quantify or subjective factors, and those were mainly range anxiety for electric vehicles. And it was important that we tried to quantify it in a way that would represent reality, after reading a bit on the side. In this project, there wasn't a lot of interaction with the client, but it was quite enriching for us in WSP to learn even more and have the opportunity to deepen on our understanding about how electric vehicle sales and uptake in a system can be affected by different types of components, like range anxiety, as I said, but also charging infrastructure, both public and private. So yeah, it was interesting in this kind of way. The third one that we did was for the Southern California Association of Governments. And in this project, what we did is that we created a small system dynamic model in order to quantify and explore the effect of a road pricing scheme on emission, generated revenue, traffic work within the Southern California area. And some outputs were, for example, so it was, for example, the generated revenue. And after that, we also created a loop, for example, that would reinvest this generated revenue from those road pricing scheme into public transportation. So that was quite interesting. And in this project, we also did this interaction learning method that we tried to push as much as possible with workshops. And it was really interesting to see in this project both traffic modelers and traffic planners sitting around the table talking about different there are different ways and approach of how they actually see a transportation system and how they prioritize different components between each other. And then it was quite interesting to see some sort of compromise at the end. And that was really, really interesting to see in that project. And the last one that we'll be talking about is actually one of the first projects that we did. I wasn't personally involved in that, but because it was before my time, but it is something that I really want to mention because it is quite interesting, because it was one of the only ones where we actually used the model that WSP created as a whole in order to get some results that were interesting for the client. So the client that we had was Uber, and it was Uber Australia and New Zealand. They were really interested in seeing how their service will affect or even be affected by new trends. So those new trends that we do mention in our model, so connected and automated vehicle, electric vehicles, and also ride hailing. And they wanted to see how it would be affecting mainly the curbside, and how as a whole it would be also affecting the walkability in a city and the walking environment, especially in inner cities and downtown areas. And what we did here is that system dynamic was used mainly as a sort of indicator to see how those new mobilities were actually evolved in the future. And we used two scenarios. One baseline scenario, which are kind of a do nothing scenario where we had our elasticities and our formulas that were adapted for Australia and New Zealand, but that with a do nothing kind of view on it. And then they had a shared mobility principle scenario. And from what I understood is they are part of some sort of shared mobility association or I don't know exactly what it is, but they have multiple principles. And what was interesting in that is that those principles are quite broad and general. And so one of the principles that they had, for example, was transition toward a zero emissions, and the second one was move people, not cars. And so what was interesting is for us to translate this into more quantifiable relationship and components. And how do we improve? How do we change our components, our values that are already in our model in order to adapt for that? So, for example, for the first one, which is move towards a more zero emissions society, we translated that with increasing subsidy for electric vehicle purchase and also increasing charging availability. And for move people, not cars, we changed the transit cost index for it to be more, for it to be cheaper to take public transportation and more expensive to take car. So it was also quite interesting, and you can see here basically the results that was for ride sharing. So yeah, that was my presentation. So if you have any questions now, you can ask them, but you also are free to contact me later using that email address here.
Super. Thank you very much, Karim. Really nice to see quite strongly in your presentation, but also across all of the presentations today, the level of engagement that we have from clients, that they're not just leaving you to it and then wanting to have the answer. But on that note, we have the same question for you that we had for our previous two speakers. So I was wondering if you could talk about that in terms of guarantees to the client.
Yeah, so basically what we have as a guarantee for the client is that they should understand that it is a model, so it's not going to be precise. It also is defined by the assumption that we do from the beginning. And what is interesting also with system dynamic is a sort of, it's important not to look at exact values, but to look at trends and comparing scenarios and everything in order for us to understand how different components interact with each other, and this is quite important there. So it's not, I don't want to say that what we look at here is not necessarily the output. We do look at the output, but we look at the connection and why we got a certain output and how this output got affected by different components. And this is what we can, in a way, guarantee here, is this trying to understand even more different types of scenarios that can happen, but also cannot happen because we are uncertain about this future. But from our knowledge, how do we create that? And I guess the second part of the question, I don't know why I cannot see the those the chat is somewhere here, I guess. There we go. The second part of the question, I guess, is also the same. If I was involved, or how are we involved in this? I was personally involved in 2 projects. The first two that I mentioned. So the one for Norway and the one for Trafikverket, so the Swedish Transport Authority. But what is important also to say is that we do work with our clients. So everyone in a way is involved in that. And even if some clients are not as keen in getting involved as much, we do push for that in order for them to understand what we're doing, to understand all the assumptions that we put into and why we do those assumptions as well. And because we also want to understand their point of view, what are they looking for, what are they searching for an answer, in order for us to be able to adapt that. So I also want to say that we are all involved in that, but we do work here at WSP. We have a team of 4 people that work with that model. So I want to say that we've been doing a good job with that.
Great, thanks. We've got one more question in the chat, and then we've got a hand up from Marco. So the question in the chat came through first, which is from Yihan on how did you approach the quantification of the range anxiety in the end based on literature? So
what we did there is we did do an assumption with range anxiety, is that what we did there is that, let me think a bit. How did you do that? What I remember is that we did do an assumption with range anxiety that was a sort of an index. So it wasn't really, it was something that was between 0 and 1. And we tried to model as much as possible some sort of an S curve, because we did use as an assumption that that's how people will behave. So 0 would be 0 will be what was it again? 0 would be that they're quite, I think it was, they're really the range is quite high, so they won't really consider electric vehicles. And 1 is that they will only consider electric vehicles, because this S curve was based on 0 to 1 index and then the range, so the kilometers. And what we did on our literature review is trying to find as much as possible, which was very hard because there's not a lot of on that, the function, the S function that would actually fit the most. And we didn't really succeed with that, but we did share this information with Trafikverket, telling them that what are our assumption, what is the function, and what we did. And yeah, that's how we basically did it there.
Very complex.
Yeah.
Marco.
Yeah, it's a bit in the same corner. Did you find out, and it's maybe also for the other presenters, when running such models, do you identify like robust or even or volatile kinds of feedback loops, like no matter what happens, everything will in this thing will even converge to the same outcome more or less, or if this happens or this relationship is actually so very unpredictable that it could, well, only a small thing has to happen and the whole system becomes unstable, for instance. Do you find such laws of nature more or less, and how do you communicate those to your principal?
Yeah, so basically what we do, we do have, we always have relationships that are not really stable, and we are not really that we don't really have some good grounds on it. And this is basically mainly in the connected and automated vehicle part, because this is quite new. We don't really have a lot of to come out from. In this part, we do identify loops, and we do share that with our clients. And those are relationship, and the assumptions when it comes to the quantified values there are based on this and that, and they should be taken with a lot of salt and pepper. But we do have also some sort of quite a robust part, and that we are quite sure about, which are based on basically historical data, and that is mainly in the ride hailing part, because there we do have a sort of it works with some sort of utility functions where we do have more of a mode choice creation that is created there between private cars, public transportation, and ride hailing. And there we are quite sure about that is based on historical data and literature review. But we do also say that it is important to know that this is also with the ride hailing, which is also a new mobility that also needs to be it needs to be also quite taken with salt and pepper. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Karim. And I'm not seeing any other questions or hands up for yourself, but I would like to invite, if there's anyone has any general questions for all three of our speakers. So I know Mike's just had to drop off for 5 minutes before we start on our panel discussion. If there is anything that hasn't been covered so far, do stick that in the chat, or put your hand up now if you've got anything to ask. I know we're running a little bit over my schedule. That's my fault, because I thought I'd scheduled half an hour for each of our speakers, but we've got plenty of flexibility built in. Don't worry about that. So if anyone does have a question, I did have one sort of general one myself. It's just a sort of practical one for both Martijn and Karim. And in terms of your models, they're in-house models. Do you keep them completely in-house, or do you create models that the client would then take ownership of themselves? Because I think the UDM, they work with the client, and then they have a license to use the UDM. Do you have those type of models, or is it ones that you just work with the client during the project and give them some results?
I can start. What we have here, our internal model is mainly, it does stand internally for us. We do use it for in order for us to take some outputs, but as I also said, we try to use it as a base. Like, we don't want to use it in itself, because it is a general model that with a lot of relationship and quite strategic. So it is important for us that when we work with the client, we always kind of push into creating a sort of model that is either based on our model in a way. So we do take some components and we create a model that will reflect those the specific questions that are being asked, and how do we tackle those and respond to them. And this model itself can be shared with the client, because we do co-create it together, and it's something that is owned by both of us in a way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Martijn?
Yeah, for us, it's also the word co-creation is very familiar in there. We work with FanSim software, and that type of work we keep internally, but we take our FanSim model with us to the client and develop all the assumptions that we all support. And then we translate all the model runs and the different assumptions or the uncertain input into a dashboard that can be shared with the client. So we make a user-friendly tool based on our model.
Great, thanks. Not seen any hands. We have had a comment from Lobel, who's asked the questions to all of you. Statement: if there's no guaranteed positive minimum, the minimum is equal to 0. Not entirely sure what you're getting at there. If you want to elaborate. No, maybe we can pick that up later. But now I'd like to pass on to my colleague Astrid, who is going to be chairing our panel session with our three speakers. Well, two speakers to start with, and then Mike will be back with us soon.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't even hear him.
Hi, Mike. Yeah, great that you're back exactly in time for the start of the panel discussion. So Gillian said to me I can use all the 20 minutes that were initially assigned, and I thought I'd give 5 minutes at the end to the audience. But we had a few questions in advance for the panel, which could be interesting for many of us. So the first question is a bit, what was the trigger, or why and when did your company choose to adopt system dynamics? So was it kind of a research interest? Was it client wish? Was it a personal initiative? Or, I mean, we are all convinced that system dynamics is good, but what made you do this in a professional or practical application? Mike, maybe want to start?
Yeah, but actually it was because of the chap who used to work for Steer, who first created the UDM, is a guy called John Swanson. I think he might have appeared at such talks before. I guess it was all down to him. He was 20 years ago, he was involved in some project work. He wanted to quantify impacts on land use somehow, and he did some research and came across, the work of Forrester, that system dynamics, and he decided that was a good tool to use, and he took it from there. I think otherwise, I think system dynamics isn't used that widely in the company. People are aware of causal loop diagrams, that kind of thing. People have used that without associating it with system dynamics. I think I have a bit of a desire to perhaps widen our use of system dynamics beyond the tool, the UDM tool that we have. So yeah, I don't think that's probably perhaps slightly unique. It was like one person who discovered it and drove it and built a tool with it, and it went from there.
And it was problem oriented to an extent.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Thank you, Martin or Martijn. I'm not sure.
Martijn, yeah, thanks.
Martijn.
For us, it was also a personal interest. I took it with me from academics and a few other colleagues as well. And actually, it's based on the slide I showed in the beginning of my presentation, is that we develop scenarios. We put so much assumptions in the scenario. And then it's a Dutch saying that we shoot with a cannon on actually something that should be very generally explored. So we were very dependent on a lot of predetermined scenarios, and we thought, can we change that? So we started to develop it internally, discussed with clients if they have a need for it. And before we got external projects with it, we started to develop it ourselves. And now we have a tool that we can elaborate on with it.
Very interesting also stories maybe for some of our PhD students, how to take this forward. Karin?
Yeah, it's a bit like Martijn said here at WSP. We did, it's this black box that we have with traditional models as well, that we don't really know what is inside, and we don't really understand them, because especially when we're working with, let's say, the Swedish one, which is called Sampesh, we just get an executable file that we just press, and it's quite really complicated to get to know where those assumptions come from and to change them and all of that. So sometimes we just change something in the land use and just the whole system just changes, and we don't really understand why. So for us, it was mainly to have a bit more of a control of what we're putting in and what we're getting out. But is also the fact that we did get inspired from electric vehicles, and how do we look at that in a way that we don't really have historically. And that also is something that started with electric vehicles and got built with ride hailing and connected vehicles later on. But those are like the main 2 points that started with it, I think.
It's very interesting. So a bit of combination that we see of personal interest as kind of problems that present itself to this kind of analysis. So yeah, very interesting. What did you?
taken out a point that just made me think of a point. So our model is a land use transport interaction model built in system dynamics. We had somebody join the company from a competitor who had a land use transport interaction model that was written in various coding methods, and their comments were that how non-black box it was. You can go into Vensim and you can look at all the trace through the relationships and things like that. So the fact that it was kind of very visual and non-black box we see as one of the benefits to using it for this type of model.
So is this also one of the opportunities you would see in using system dynamics with clients? This kind of openness, and are there any challenges, for example, also acceptability by the clients of this method?
I think, yes. My experience is that there isn't that much exposure within the clients to system dynamics, and actually when we introduce the model, we don't really promote it as being system dynamics. We just tell them what the model's doing and kind of show them, the interface and the diagrams and things like that. What was the other point I was going to make? I think in the area of LUTI models, I think the use of system dynamics is looked upon a little bit suspiciously. I think because the original Forrester work had some drawbacks and kind of wasn't generally accepted by the academics. So there is something there that we're trying to improve, sort of just publicize the model a bit more, talk about what it's doing, maybe make some of the mechanisms a bit more in line with traditional LUTI models, but still keeping this kind of non-black box approach.
Same for you, or different? Martin or Karim?
Yeah, thanks. For us, it's mostly in the mindset. We try to change a bit of the mindset on how to do policy making. If you want certainty, then you have to neglect a lot. So that is, we think, problematic, and we see responsibility for ourselves as a consultancy company to provide the needed information so our clients can use that to support their decision making. And if you neglect a lot of uncertainties, then you have a very certain idea of how the future will look like. But this mindset is indeed challenging. And further on, I think people recognize that it's a very useful method to explore the future instead of to predict the future.
My experience is that a lot of decision makers would rather not have uncertain results because they have to justify a decision to, for example, investors or people saying, I want a new road and I want to know my road is better than my neighboring authority's road, or I have to tell them which investment is better. So how do you deal with this kind of uncertainty, reluctance?
To first, really make sure that they accept that they don't know everything. If you want to be certain, you just neglect a lot. So you want to be certain of your future, but we try to make sure that there are a lot of uncertainties and nobody knows exactly how 2040 will look like. But once you start accepting that, you can explore how you want 2040 to look like and build towards there.
Thank you. Karim?
Yeah, it's a bit like that as well. For us, it's more quantifiable. I think they want to see numbers, and they think that the numbers that we get are exactly what is going to happen. And sometimes it's quite difficult to explain to them that this is the number that you see is not necessarily exactly what we're going to see, but it's also a comparison with other types of scenario, how the it's a comparison thing that we also need to understand, and the trends that we see with time. That is quite important to also say. They are also a bit reluctant because it is a new system. It gets back a bit to the same problem where, because it hasn't been used before, then they are reluctant to use it now, because how are we going to justify that? But with historical data, so we've been using the 4-step models for 50 years or even more. So that's something that we know works and how it works. But how do we move to something different? And this is a bit reluctant. They're a bit like suspicious when they look at something new that they don't really know how it will work and how it will what it will produce for result and outcomes in a way.
And do you see a big difference in the type of clients? I saw you have a very broad range from, let's say, public planning authorities to maybe Uber as a private company. How they approach this?
I mean, it was interesting because when I personally worked with the one for Trafikverket in Sweden, so the transport authority here, the public one in Sweden, and then the railway authority in Norway. And the way they perceived it is quite different from each other. Is that the Norwegians are quite prone to change. They want to test. They want to know more stuff, and it's quite interesting. They were really involved in that. But when we worked with Trafikverket on the Swedish side, they were quite reluctant. They were interested, but they were interested with the method. But the way we interacted with the client was more of a traditional way. Like they hired us, we work, we deliver. It's not really of in this interaction way, which was a bit like disappointing in a way for them, because it was also interesting for them to understand what is actually happening there. With Uber, I don't really know because I wasn't really involved in that project, if you want to talk public-private, but I want to say it was in the beginning of our system dynamic model. So I guess they were also quite prone into something new because we were also new at this as well. So maybe they were also, the uncertainty of something new as well. So I don't know.
Yeah, Marco, you just had an observation.
Yeah, well, we have the same. For different clients, we approach system dynamics in the same way, but we see much difference in clients. We are hired by using the traditional way of using our traffic models. That's a lot more behind the scenes work, and there we use our black box that has a lot of trust in the Netherlands, which is good, of course. But in this case, we collaborate a lot more with the clients because we open up this black box and make it a white box and really explore what do you want to change, what are the assumptions, do we agree with everything that's used or not. So the difference is in collaboration, and that's much easier with system dynamics.
And Mike, you're around internationally a lot. Are there differences? My experience with Austria is a kind of big skepticism towards model or scientific approaches to modeling.
So you're talking internationally?
Yeah.
So of the places where we've done it internationally recently was in the US, and I guess it was kind of two ends. I think we had the two ends of the spectrum. So I mentioned on one of my slides, we have the knowledgeable, there's the method focused people and the output focused. So I think two of the places that we did, so it's Boston and Maryland. I think that the people, they were very relatively small organizations. They were more interested in sort of the output, so you didn't kind of really question. You were just kind of interested and like, oh, that's nice. That's so it was more kind of easy to impress them. Whereas then with the San Francisco work, where we kind of used it as just a transport model, we had to justify everything to people who were familiar with the traditional, 4-step transport models. So on that one, we were questioned and questioned and questioned, and we had to explain absolutely everything that we were doing. So yeah, a bit of a range. I think it depends on the client, size of the client, their experiences.
Marco, would you like to pose your observation from this?
I've been working at municipalities before. I worked for Crow for 16 years, and it is quite comfortable for civil servants to fall back to the thing the devil is the traditional traffic model. these kinds of approaches do require a lot of more of creative thinking beforehand. They do require a lot of visioning, as Martijn also said. So it really needs, you really need to discuss beforehand what are the directions we want to look at and what are the things we want to know. Those models that are described, in my opinion, are very potentially very complex, and they contain so many buttons you can push that you really have to know what kind of analysis you want to make beforehand to answer the questions you want to have answered to. So you can just, well, help yourself and guide yourself through well, it is a playground, but you need some guidance to play the right games with it, in order to get some more insight. So, and it is really hard then to confront political decision makers, because they also would have to, well, say in advance which direction they want to go. And it's a lot easier to just say, well, the model said that we have to build this road, so the model made me do it, and instead of having to think of it for themselves. So that's an observation that I've been seeing quite a lot now, and it takes quite some how you say, some guts from those political now the politicians, but also the civil servants that would hire a consulting firm that would do this with them, because then it really you start asking different questions, as far as I have seen it until now.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the observation. Maybe the speakers can reflect on this, and kind of a last question. So, where do you see your future going? So maybe Martijn, start this time.
Yeah, well, not much to add actually to what Marco just said. I agree that if we decide together on how do we want the future to look like, and we really understand what causes and effects are in this future, that helps a lot actually to change the current policy making into making it more adaptive, to realize how we want the future to look like.
And you think that's also the way forward for your company's use of system dynamics to kind of push this?
Yeah, I believe technically a lot of the stuff that we want to do is possible, but yeah, we need to make sure that it's used in the right way. And system dynamics is definitely not a replacement for traffic models, because it cannot, for example, calculate what happens exactly on a certain place on the road. So therefore, we will always need the traffic models. But what we put into these traffic models, I believe we have more influence on that.
Thank you. Karim?
Yeah, I can also kind of been saying the same, is that our way forward is some sort of like a co-working between a traffic model and system dynamics, and maybe system dynamics can come as the first step in understanding what we want to do if we're just re-evaluating the whole system in the future with new types of mobility and new types of trends and relationships. Then it can come as a strategic, more or less of a big view. And then when we understand that what we want to do, what are the policies that in a whole work, how do we apply that in a transportation model that we understand as well there, in a way, in those policies and how they will affect a bit more of a detailed way the transportation system as a whole. And I think this is what we are trying here as a company to do, is that so this sort of collaboration between the two types of methods, and if a transportation model is even necessary, sometimes we can realize that after doing system dynamics, realize, oh, but we don't actually need to go a bit more into details with that. This is more than enough. We need to come back, take a step back and reassess. And then that is also quite important from the policymakers to understand that this is also something that is possible to do.
Thank you. Mike?
As you're talking now, I'm thinking about this sort of this pull between complex models, which take a long time to run, long time to build, take lots of data, and simple models which give you more high-level results, but they're quicker to run, and the data is available to build them. I see the model, the UDM, it fits at that end where we're trying to create a model which can be used. There's a lot of looting models which are created in academia and they're not actually used in real life because they're too difficult to implement and the data is not available. So I'm trying to build a model, or I'll keep the model as being something which we can implement in a reasonable amount of time within clients' budgets and has the right data. The data that we need for it is available. So that's kind of how I see the future of the UDM. And then system dynamics is a tool to get us there, because the model is built in system dynamics, and helps to explain to people how it runs. But then also we've seen some recent clients in the US who have these huge activity-based transport models, and they want to do just some quick runs, just check some scenarios for a strategic plan, and the model takes days, hours to run, and we've kind of see that there's an opportunity there for a simple model, which I kind of mentioned. We've done it for in San Francisco, so we're thinking about adapting a transport model sort of version of the model I produced to sort of address those simplified model needs. So I guess and system dynamics is a means to an end in all that. It's the idea is, the goal is the simplified models, make them available, and system dynamics allows us to do that, in my view.
Thank you very much. I think we might have time for another question, or if there are none, I'm happy to kind of hand over back to Gillian for the break announcement. So are there any urgent questions? If not, then thank you to all three of you. I found it extremely interesting, also motivating to kind of push ahead in our teaching of system dynamics as a tool for our future transport planners. So thank you very much. And I hand back to Gillian.
Yes, thank you very much, all three of you, for your presentations and the really interesting discussions just now, and for Astrid for chairing that session. It is interesting seeing the comparison to academia, but also that between yourselves that you've got quite a lot of crossover, obviously, but some very different outlooks as well. But mainly the fact that you are all committed to system dynamics, which we like to see, and hope that we can collaborate and keep in touch going forward. So thank you very much. I'm going to start the break now, so we'll just say sort of what we're on, 2 minutes past 2 here in the UK. Let's take the break until 10 past. So we're just running about 10 minutes late, but we've got plenty of time to catch up on. After the break, we're going to have talks from 2 PhD students using SD, so very much the start of their careers. And so looking forward to hearing all about that. But for now, please do get a walk away from the screen, stretch your legs, grab a water, and we'll see you back at 10 past whatever our time zone you're currently in. Thank you again. Hello, everyone. We are now at 10 past, so I'm hoping we've got people back in the room, so to speak. I'm seeing a few cameras going on there. So this session, we're going to be hearing from two PhD students who are using system dynamics. Both of them are in the sort of broad region of freight and logistics, so they fit together quite nicely. We have Nurkarim from University of Leeds and Zeynep Rufi from KTH in Sweden. But I'm going to pass over to Simon Shepherd now, who is going to be chairing this session. Thank you.
Thanks, Gillian, and thanks for organising today. Really interesting first session. As you've said, we're going to listen here to PhD students, and the first up is Noor, who's looking at, looking the other way, human-machine interactions in warehousing and road freight transportation. So when you're ready, Noor, if you want to share your screen.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Hi and hello everyone. My name is Noor. I'm a second year PhD student at the Institute for Transport Studies, University of Leeds. So I'm here to share my ongoing research project on a topic that is at the forefront of technological advancement and has a profound implications for the future of warehousing and road freight operations. So my research entitled System Dynamics Modeling for Human-Machine Interactions in Warehousing and Road Freight Transportation within the Industry 4.0 framework, with a focus of causal loops diagram for these presentations. So I'll be sharing on the introductions, objectives, methodology, analysis, and conclusions. So to start, a warehouse plays an important role in supply chain, serving as a transportation consolidation center or transit hub. So the collaborations and integrations between warehousing and road freight operations serve as a vital components of the global supply chain, ensuring efficient movement and storage of goods. So in line with the growth of Industrial Revolution 4.0, or is known as Fourth Industrial Revolutions, with the introductions of the automations, robotics, digitalizations is transforming the traditional practices. So replacing the human workers with the human worker tasks that are found to be repetitive, dangerous, and tedious. So in an era defined by the rise of Industry 4.0, the increasing integration of automations and advancement technologies, the dynamics between human and machines have become a central area of investigations. But however, human elements in Industry 4.0 system have generally overlooked in the extant studies on Industry 4.0. So if you could see in figure 1, a study carried by Scarbos in the year 2020, simulations, decision support model, and survey received far less attention in tackling the critical concern in the human factors in the 4.0 settings. So though simulation is known for their practical approach to tackle problems in transport, handling, manufacturing, and environmental concerns. So overall, the purpose of my research is to understand this evolving landscape and its consequences of human and machine interactions in warehouse and road freight within the concept Industry 4.0 in long-term effects. So these are my study objectives, but as for today, I'll be focusing on the second objective, which currently my ongoing research progress. So is to develop a dynamic causal loops model of the interactions between humans and machines in warehouse and road freight operations using a system thinking approach. So as for methodology part, there are two approaches that I've used. One is systematic literature review and alongside with the Delphi expert survey. So under the SLR, I've used the well-known Prisma procedures to get the numbers of articles to be analyzed. And then NVivo software is used for coding purposes. And finally, to come up with the descriptive and content analysis. So as for the Delphi expert survey, it involved both industry and academic experts, and it was done 2 rounds of online survey using JSE online survey. And for the stage 1, I've used open-ended questions and 5 Likert skills to understand the importance level of the variables that I found from the literature. And it's mainly to get feedback from expert on this scenario and to get more variables coming from the expert which had not been found from the literature survey. And followed by the outcomes from the stage 1, and I did some combinations with the systematic literature reviews outcome. So I've go back to the expert for the cause and effect relationships for the second stage, mainly to get them validate the cause and effects of each of the variables. So these are the PISMA procedures that I've done on my SLR approach. So I've got 2 sets of keywords on these corpus. I'm mainly using Scopus and Web of Science and Google Scholar for the grey literature. So after doing the screening, inclusion, exclusion criteria of the articles, it down to 34 articles included for the analysis. So I've done the descriptive and content analysis for those 34 articles. And from that content analysis, I've got 8 categories, which are listed down on the material flows, inventory management, machines, space, employees, cost, and human and machine impacts. So within those content analysis, human and machine impacts receive very less study had been done, which are for only 3 articles within 34 articles that I've used for my review. So then I've got this combined from the literature and then combine them into this single CLD. So from this CLD, it resulted to 4 balancing loops and 2 reinforcing loops. So as for the inbound process, it reflecting for the the balancing loops for the inbound process, and for the outbound process, it reflects on the orders completions. And going forward to the Delphi expert survey, I've got 10% out of 50 email invitations sent to the expert, both industry and academic. So it was within 3 months period, and we decided to take down the surveys and start with the analysis. So we've got 5 experts to give feedbacks and give variables validations somehow with the new variables coming on each of the categories. So we have done 2 rounds required to obtain agreement in Delphi studies. So on the second round, representing the restructured closure loops diagram, I received 4 out of 5 experts, which one of them decided to drop out. So my next step is to get more experts to validate the restructured CLD, though they might not involve in this first stage, but looking forward for more experts to validate the model. So this is the restructured CLD, combinations of the from the literatures and from the expert feedbacks. So those with the dotted arrows, dash arrows. So those with dash arrows those are coming from revisions from the experts. So and those with normal arrows are from the literatures, that from the SLR. From out of 8 categories, expert agreed to drop out the cost category. So it cannot be found in the final CLD, which they agreed to drop off the cost category, which they believe this is not reflecting to what I'm looking at for the HMI in this industry. So on the top diagram is focusing on the activities of the warehousing and road freight, while the green color coded are reflecting on the inventory management, though it's not significantly impact, but they play in a role in terms of moving of goods from inbound and outbound. So considering that inventory in the system is significant, so I'm not dropping it out. And for the pink color coded is for the machine's input or machine resources, and the yellow color coded are the workers' input, and the red ones are the human-machine interaction factors. So in general, HMI consists of 4 main aspects, which are physical, mental, and psychosocial with the perceptual aspects. So experts agreed to have the perceptual aspect within the loop of physical. So B5 represent the physical aspect, B6 represent the mental aspect, and R4 represent the psychosocial aspect. So they believe that the perceptual aspect is going around through the both B5 and B6. And to conclude, what I've done so far is mainly focus on developing a qualitative modeling framework to identify the key variables and dynamic factors to create the feedback mechanism. And this is the first step to start with the stock and flow simulation model, which will be done after having quite a number of experts to validate the previous CLD, the restructured CLD. And overall, it will contribute to advancing knowledge and comprehensions in this field with practical implications for enhancing operational efficiency and decision-making process. And these are the key references. And thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Very interesting presentation. Have we got any quick questions? If you'd like to post them in the chat, or just raise your hand and ask a direct question. Astrid?
Yeah, thank you for the interesting presentation. I was just wondering, in your Delphi study, you said you presented these causal loop diagrams to the experts. Were the experts already familiar with this causal loop diagram, or did you kind of introduce them to the method, or how did you do that?
So I've got like 5 experts so far. So one from industry. So technically he has no background of system dynamics, but I've got like some detail of explanation of system dynamics within the survey. And for among the academics, 2 out of 4 experts are having the system dynamics background. So they are quite well known with system dynamics, and they give quite good feedbacks so far.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't kind of talk to those people initially, and no.
I approached them through the online surveys.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Gillian?
Thanks, Simon. I know a fair bit about Noah's work. We've discussed it before, and it's interesting to see how it's developed over the past year or so since our last chat. And I want to talk about something that you didn't have in your presentation, but you mentioned going forward in terms of your stock flow simulation model. I think I remember that you were hoping to get some data from an actual warehousing company. Is that still your plan? How's the contact going with that? I think you were maybe even talking about visiting the warehouse yourself to gather data.
So my current plan is that I need to get my simulation model done, with the quantified model done. When I feel satisfied with the quantified model, only then I decided to go with the industry data. So I don't want to give like something that uncertain to the industry by having an incomplete model yet. So my plan is to get my quantified model to be done. The stock and flow diagram can be run with some dummy data, and then when I'm satisfied, so I will decide to go for the industry real data and get some real feedbacks from the workers as well.
Okay, great. Look forward to seeing what comes of that.
And there's a question in the chat from Zainab. Did you have stakeholders with different perspectives, and how did you compromise in this case?
Sorry, say it again.
So did you have stakeholders who had different perspectives on the problem, And if so, how would you go forward or compromise in this case?
So far, my respondents that involved in my study are those from academics with the background of warehousing and road freights. And the industry guy that I have approached is the chairman in the warehousing, and he also works as a consultant for logistics and supply chain. So as far I think the stakeholders that involved in the validating my CLD are both from academics and industry experts. So yeah, but
So
I'm not looking for those like in government yet. But yeah, if I could get like some from policymaker, it would be great as well.
Okay, so they all agreed and they didn't have any disagreements about the CLD?
Yeah, so far the restructured CLD, they are all agreed with the cause and effect relationships I presented to them, and then they are all agreed with the links between the variables so far.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just that some suggestions on focusing on at the bottom side on the HMI rather having the overall pictures. So that's one of the major comments was given from she or he is a SD expert as well. So one of the comments saying that maybe I shall focus at the bottom CLD rather having the overall system. So yeah, that will be one of the consideration of the future steps.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that. Has anybody else got a final question for Noor? Okay, I can't see any hands up. So thanks a lot, Noor, and we'll move on to Zainab. If you want to share your screen. So you're talking about electric truck adoption. Okay, when you're ready.
Okay, no, I was muted, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity. It was really interesting to present in somewhere that is combination of the transportation and system dynamic actually. So my research is about the effect of charging infrastructure availability and the adoption of the electric truck. And it is like again chicken dynamic problem. And I'm PhD student at KTH University. Actually, I came from ITRL, Integrated Transport Research Lab in KTH, that we are doing a lot of multidisciplinary research in transportation, together with Scania, Ericsson, and Traffic Circuit. So what is the problem? Actually, the road freight transport system is not a sustainable system as current. It is responsible for 7% of the total global emission. And then electrification would be a very promising solution to solve part of this problem actually, and then transit us to the more sustainable future. But the problem is that there are, as we can see here in Sweden or like all around the world, the market share of the new electric truck is very low. For example, in Sweden, we have like just 2% of new sales, but in the passenger car is like 32%. So it's like a huge difference. So my PhD is about to understand from system level perspective to understand why it's happened and what is the main barrier and what is the main motivation to this transition. And through my research, we understood that charging infrastructure could play an important role here. So we dig into the charging infrastructure and how availability on the charging infrastructure will affect. So basically we explore that, okay, how the availability will affect and the adoption of the electric truck. So our goal is to increase the adoption of electric truck, that we can reduce the emission in this way. And then how the public and private sector investment in charging infrastructure could help us to accelerate this adoption. And then what are the policy intervene that we can use in this problem. For example, if I am a policymaker, if I have $1 million or 1 million krona, anything, so how I should intervene in different part of the system and which one is the most efficiency in the system. So, and then as we answer this question, this is again chicken dynamic problem, that in this way that, okay, the more e-truck that we have, the more charging infrastructure that we need. And then the more charging infrastructure that available everywhere, it's more attractive to have electric truck, and then we have more electric truck. So, but the problem is that which one should be first? If we should have first a lot of electric truck everywhere and then start to build charging, or if we should have this charging infrastructure ready and then started to like produce this electric truck, egg or chicken. So I want to tell you the story of my model. Actually, it's built based on a 21 interview and 2 workshops with the experts that are mainly from the industry. And so I will tell the story about my casual loop, and then we will go to the study envelope. So what is the story? We want to have more e-truck sale. Okay, the more e-truck sale, the more e-truck fleet size that we have. And then the more e-truck fleet size, the more technology awareness that we have. And then we have more attractiveness of the e-truck. I use this utility function or attractiveness of truck to just bring everything that's effect on the this attractiveness here in this variable, and then it affect on the sale. So we have positive loop of the awareness that we have in every product. I can say if there is a new iPhone 14 that, oh, I heard from my friend, and then the awareness will increase. So technology awareness is a very important part of this game. And after that, we have technology maturity, actually. That, okay, how this truck manufacturer invest in the battery, invest in the truck itself to mature the technology. And it affects positively on the attractiveness of the truck. So we have the second positive loop, that is maturity. But what happened after? We understood that the current charging system doesn't work, actually, and we need a new network of a charging station. Okay, the more e-truck that we have, the more charging demand that we have, and the more demand for the charging station. And we have some installed charging station in the system, and the difference, like the market gap of charging infrastructure, negatively affect this attractiveness, because there is some e-truck that they can't charge, so it's negatively affect. And we call it this balancing availability of the charging station. Okay, how we should solve it? As I mentioned, by investment by both government and public. So the idea of my research is that how this investment and this money could help to accelerate the adoption of the electric truck. So I explored that, okay, what motivates government to invest? The government motivated by the emission goal gap, that, for example, in Sweden, we have an emission goal of to reduce 70% of emission in comparison between 2010. And then we have some regulation in EU and so on that we should build some special number of charging infrastructure. And what motivates the private sector? The private sector motivated basically by money, that profitability of the building of charging infrastructure increase, and then there is a big market gap, so this is a big market, and they motivate to invest and build. So by the investment, we built charging station, and we have more installed charging station. So this is a two balancing loop of public and private investment. And actually we have a electric truck cost, that is purchase cost and operational cost. Very simply, I model this part of cost that, you know, that is the word of this TCO and so on that they discuss here. And then this technology maturity actually reduce the purchase cost as well. And then the utility to cost basically determine how sale of the truck is. The more utility and the less cost, the more sale of the electric truck. This was the whole story. So I just wanted to mention a few things in this story, that we have different stakeholders here. And it's very, very interesting to look at the different perspective of different stakeholders. For example, we have freight company here in the awareness loop, that there are some people that choose to buy a new electric truck, so, and then use it actually in their daily operation. And we have vehicle manufacturing, like here in Sweden, we have Scania, that they invest a lot on the technology maturity and so on. So we have a new actor in the game, that is charging infrastructure provider, that they built new charging infrastructure, and public sector. And actually, all of them impact on the purchase cost. And in the operational cost, the price of electricity entered the game. And then we have a new player here as well, like the electricity providers. And about the policy intervene, okay, as I said, if I have 1 million corona, how I should invest? Should I give them to the freight company to buy this expensive electric truck? Should I give to the charging station provider to build this charging, or I should invest in the vehicle technology like battery technology and so on? Or should we play with the price of electricity and price of diesel to change the operational cost of the electric truck and diesel truck? So this is different policy intervene that I would like to explore in my model. Okay, good. And then I have a second flow diagram that you can see the map between different modules. I have 7 modules that I will very, very briefly explore through the module and explain for you. And then maybe in discussion, we can go back to them. So first of all, the fleet size module that determines that we have a total truck fleet size and we have a share of electric truck from this total fleet size. And the attractiveness of the electric truck determine this share. And we have utility function that including both awareness and tech maturity. That I model the tech maturity as a share of R&D investment by both government and like Scania, the manufacturer itself. And then charging station availability module that we have some under construction and install charging as a create a delay in the system. And we have investment module that is like quite interesting, that how exactly I explain what motivates the government to invest, what motivates the private sector to invest, and then how it's happened. And we discuss about charging station cost and probability, that at the end, private sector decide based on if it's profitable for them to have a new charging station or not. So we calculated this IRR rate and so on. And vehicle cost module that I said that is a simple one. So it's not very complicated, but we calculated like total cost of e-truck and total cost of diesel truck, and they compete to each other. And finally, I added emission module that calculated the emission and showed that if we reach our goal or not, and then its impact on the investment by government. So I just bring a few results of my base scenario here, but I have some results, so maybe we can discuss later. But for this, you can see that how is the adoption of the electric truck based on model until 2040, how is the share of electric truck in total fleet and share of in new sale, and actually how much we have installed charging station. Basically, these are like 4 important variable in my model. And the utility function, you can see somehow S-shaped behavior here, and then this profitability and IRR rate of having charging station, and private vs public fund. And sorry, here you can see that how the cost of the diesel and electric truck compete to each other. And the final one is like, okay, this is number that how it goes in different years based on this model, and then how much money we should invest to achieve this adoption. Yeah, that's it for now. I think that I was in time a little bit more.
Thanks, Zainab. Really interesting. Yeah. I really liked the storytelling part as well. Just an initial question from myself. Sure. You simulated out until 2040, and you had a share of the electric truck. What happens if you then simulate beyond 2040 to 2060 or somewhat further? Do you still have 2 platforms or 2 installed bases, an electric and a diesel truck?
You mean in the charging infrastructure or like?
Yeah, in the share of trucks, you have the original diesel, and then you have the electric. I'm just wondering what the long term would be. Would it be all electric? And does your model account for that?
I think that I should test it, but I think that it's not 100%. We have still some percent because this attractiveness is not 100%. But yeah, like in 2000, yeah, like in 80 year or something, yes, we have almost like 90% something I can say.
Okay.
But yeah.
And Paul, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I was working quite a lot on the topic of battery electric propulsion technology, not in the truck sector. I think it's a very interesting model. And as Simon said, I also liked your storytelling, but what I recognized in your storytelling, if you probably can go back to the causal loop diagram, it's not a mistake, or there is one feedback loop missing from technology maturity to the e-truck purchase costs. There's another feedback loop, a reinforcing one. You have used here a shadow variable, so maybe you overlooked this loop, or maybe it would be also nice to show this feedback loop. Your first baseline result seemed to be a bit optimistic to me for the truck sector. At which type of trucks do you look? Do you have one average truck for all these different truck classes?
Yeah, my focus in the like heavy truck, more than 3.5 tons. So all the data is calibrated based on the heavy truck.
But it's all above 3.5 tons from the small delivery trucks up to the articulated trucks. So probably it would be good to make a division into different types of trucks. And as I've seen from your stock flow model, you seem to have a uniform survival rate in the fleet, so that you divide the stock by the average lifetime, and this part leaves out the fleet. I have the same structure in my passenger car model, but it turned out that this is causing problems, underestimating the battery electric vehicle fleet, because with a uniform survival rate already also at the beginning, an overestimated share of vehicles is leaving the fleet. I don't know if I explained it in an understandable way. From my point of view, if you have still time and resources, I would recommend to include some age cohorts with different survival rates. So the percentage share of vehicles which leaves the fleet, which is scrapped, is much higher in older age cohorts.
Yeah, I understand.
But just if you have still resources to work on the model, this would be a recommendation from my side, where you might be able to improve the model and to differentiate between different truck types. But as I said at the beginning, a very good and nice piece of work. And as far as I know, we will meet in Milano. You have some papers in the conference, so we can discuss this issue further if you're interested.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Thank you so much. Yeah, we discussed about this. This is a huge range of truck from the 3.5 to like 80 tons. So And then it was interesting that when I increased the total kilometer driven, the attractiveness of e-truck increased, because the value of the e-truck is to having less operational cost. So when we use it much more, it's more attractive. So it's interesting to see that, okay, we have different utility function for different kind of truck. Yeah, my problem was like, I didn't have all the data for all the, different kind.
Yeah.
And then I have just these like heavy truck category in the data. So I think that is a problem with system dynamics in this phase, that like you need to stay with the average values, and you can't have like, good categorized data. But I for sure I will explore.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Thank you so much for the very good feedback.
And now I have Marco, I think, was next.
I think Astrid was before me, but
Oh, okay.
You go ahead.
okay. It's very interesting to see this application of these feedback loops and how you calculate stuff with it. One of the things that struck me a bit in the beginning was that it looks like you are focusing more or less on the positive feedback loops more than potential negative feedback loops. Have you found any way to look also for more in the commercial part, the sales or the attitudes of businesses or whatever to acquire these vehicles? Have you actively looked for potential negative loops, and what arguments were used for them and how realistic they are?
Yeah, very good question. You mean like about this mistrust and this kind of problem? Like, for example, we have electric truck and then it doesn't go well. We can't find a charging infrastructure, and then it created mistrust in the system somehow. We discussed about it actually, but no, really, I didn't include them in the current version of the model. But yeah, now the more e-truck that we have, the more like awareness as a percentage that we have, and then the more. But that is true. That is like this mistrust, especially in this initial phase, because electric truck is in very, very initial phase of adoption. So in this initial phase, when we fail to achieve the trust of the freight company, it's very possible to fail in this phase.
Yeah, so it would be, but I don't know if that would be really something to calculate, or maybe to discuss it in a later part of your thesis or whatever. Like, okay, these could be all kinds of mechanisms that might slow it down a bit, but maybe from the literature you could also say, well, that is something that people try to bring into this discussion, while in other fields we see that in practice those mechanisms are negligible, for instance. I don't know if that would help maybe in
that's very interesting. So I should find a way to for example, something that reduce these adoption in a negative way. Exactly.
Okay,
thank you so much.
Astrid?
Yeah, actually, my question was a very similar direction, and this was towards this technology uncertainty that we have, and we see politicians saying, no, not battery electric now, we need e-fuels or hydrogen, and that should add to this kind of uncertainty about the future technology and reluctance to invest. Was that something that was mentioned in your stories and should be included at least in a qualitative way as a leverage point also for policy?
Yeah, that's true. I think that this is like totally true. That is like we have very, very uncertainty about which kind of technology we will use. Is it like hydrogen? Is it biofuel? Is it electric? For now, I can say in Sweden, like electric truck have like a very good adoption, and then I mean we had this discussion yet, but I mean in my model I just have considered the competition between electric truck and diesel truck, so I don't have any hydrogen and biofuel, and I ignore the share of them. And then also about the charging infrastructure, we have the same story, that we have some stationary charging station, and this station, it could be depot, could be like in the highway, or even it could be road charging, like dynamic charging. Yeah, I will discuss in a part of article about these things, but really I didn't calculate, like include them in the model. Yeah, just I assume that we have 2 electric and diesel truck, and then 1 kind of charging infrastructure.
It could be an external factor about technology uncertainty or something.
Yeah, exactly.
That includes, that changes technology awareness or something.
Yeah, I can say that it could be like, instead of 2 array, it could have like 4 array of different technology.
Not necessarily. I just mean one factor, saying the uncertainty about this one technology going ahead could lead to a reluctance to invest at all in anything else than diesel trucks.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's true.
Okay, thanks for that, Astrid. Has anybody else got a final question for Zainab? I can't see any hands up, so thank you again for a very interesting presentation, and thanks also to Nur for her presentation. And I think I'll just hand over back to Gillian, I think it is, for an early start to the business meeting.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you very much, Zainab, and also to Nur before you, and thank you for engaging in the discussions. I think more than ever, it's useful to have these sessions with PhD students talking to professionals in the field, getting the feedback on their work, because obviously students have their immediate supervisors, but being able to reach out to the wider community is a really important part of developing their work, and encouraging you to stay in the area as well going forwards, and keeping in touch in that way. So thank you very much for that contribution. So yes, we have finished that section a little earlier than planned. So I said we'd make up from earlier, and now we're going to talk through some transport SIG business. So bear with me a second while I pull up my screen. Okay, so everyone should see what we've got planned to talk about today. So for those of you who have not sat in a T-SIG meeting before, welcome. Very pleased to have you. In this section, we're going to talk about what activities the T-SIG have done over the last year or so since our last meeting, and also what we're hoping to do over the next year. But more importantly than that, the things that we have actually planned, we really want to talk about how you can all get engaged, work with us. What would you like to see happen that we can support on? What can you do to make it happen as well, because obviously we all have limited resources ourselves, so we welcome as many people to get involved as possible. So just to talk about the last year, so last year we had our first time where we had a transport and mobility thread at the International System Dynamics Conference. This is something that we've been in discussions with for a few years as a SIG since we became one. Before then, for anyone who was familiar with the conference, transport papers were dealt with, I think, under the environment theme, which works well enough in a lot of cases, but we really felt merited that we had enough momentum within transport to have its own dedicated sessions. So myself, Astrid, who you've seen earlier, and also Jeroen Stuben were the 3 chairs for this. So last year we actually had 28 submissions. I think I couldn't find my full notes on this, so it's a little bit woolly, but I think we accepted 10 papers, and I think from one that we had 1 parallel session. And then we also had last year I'm sorry, I would say more about that, but I didn't actually go myself, so I can't say how well they actually went down within that. So I don't know if anybody in the room did actually go. Astrid, do you want to say something about it?
Yeah, I mean, we had a few papers and I think they were well attended. I really enjoyed the sessions, and so it also was a good networking opportunity, I think, for those who were there. But also we had quite a few students from master courses in system dynamics who were then sharing an interest in maybe continuing in the transport field. So that's also a good networking opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Astrid. And as well, I've got it later on in the slide, but I might as well mention that we've got a similar thread this year, which is happening in a couple of weeks' time. I don't think we got as many submissions, but I seem to understand that submissions were down across all of the categories with the System Dynamics conference this year, but we did have some good quality submissions as well. So I'll touch on that later when I get to the upcoming events. So also last year we had I think it was the 3rd or 4th year at the European Transport Conference as a System Dynamics thread. And we had 7 papers accepted out of 7 submissions, which resulted in 2 parallel sessions, I believe, which I was actually at. And there was quite there's starting to be quite a few faces that were recognised and coming back at these sessions, and that we're communicating with people. As I've said before, WSP and Goudapel, who presented earlier, have both been involved in ETC sessions. And being a part of the wider ETC community as well. I mentioned earlier, I've not actually put it on this slide, but just this morning, Paul and myself did a webinar with the Association of European Transport and Mobility Forum on system dynamics and transport. Now, AET are who actually organise the ETC, for those of you who aren't aware of them. So that was where that link came from as the System Dynamics Committee. So it went well last year, and again we've got sessions again this year, which Paul's going to be talking about later on. But anyone who would like to be involved in the actual committees for either ISDC or ETC, there are opportunities to help us in reviewing the papers and selecting them going forward. So if that's something you're interested in, do drop us a line. Also, over the past year, one of our key outputs has been a webinar series, which was managed by Perifan. I don't know if Perifan's actually in the room. I know he said he wasn't going to be able to make all of the session today because he had a workshop. Just quickly flicking through the list, and I'm not seeing him. And as he's not popped off, I assume that he's not actually here. So hopefully some of you in the room may have attended these. We actually had 4 webinars over the period. I think the first one was in November up to February, March, I think it was, that we had these in place. And we were very much focusing on the qualitative approaches, so looking at the development of causal loop diagrams and using participatory approaches, so group model building within that. And we had 4 very different presentations. There was one by myself and a colleague. We've been using Lego Serious Play to help develop causal loop diagrams. From the OECD, we had Mariana, who was looking at how they'd been using SD, in particular, causal loop diagrams in various parts of their work. So that was really interesting, seeing it from the sort of governmental support type of way that the OECD operates in. We then had one from Perifan and his colleague Sarosh that were actually looking at micromobility. I know this was a project that had actually been ongoing for a long time. I think it had started pre-COVID, this one, if I remember correctly, but had a lot of engagement with various different stakeholders in the development of that. And then finally, we had Claudia Angeretto talking about the city hubs. logistics development approach. And I know Claudia had actually presented it previously. I can't remember whether it was a T-SIG or whether ETC or both on that work. And I think Claudia is involved with Zainab's work as well. So we're starting to get this little community of people here, and anyone who's interested or would like to suggest an idea for a webinar series. Obviously today we went with the focus of transport and consultancy for our main session. Maybe we could look at looking at the use of system dynamics in policy making more specifically, or any sort of area that people might be interested in. But all of these presentations are available to view on the System Dynamics Society YouTube. So you can access that if you go through the System Dynamics Society website and go to the Transport Special Interest Group. There's a link there to all of our recordings. The recording of today will be available there soon afterwards as well. But also I think if you just Google System Dynamics YouTube, you can find that channel, because that's how I usually find it, because I can never find the link that I need. So that's covered, I think, everything that we've done over the past year. But coming up, as I've mentioned, we've got both the System Dynamics conference, which is in a few weeks. So too late if you want to put anything in for that, but still you can go. It is based in Chicago, I think, if I remember rightly, but it is also hybrid. In fact, actually, I think there's very limited spaces if you want to attend in person, only 300, I believe. But you can attend in hybrid form. We did put together 4 sessions, but when I was looking at the program, I think the only one that we've got that's transport dedicated is the parallel session. So this is the one where full papers will be discussed on safe and sustainable transport. But then we had a number of work in progress papers. So these are the shorter sessions or shorter discussions for the presenters and posters as well. And they've been split into some other sessions, it seems, looking at the conference schedule. But we're getting them in there. So anyone who has submitted, thank you very much. And I hope the presentation goes well. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to make this one again. I'll just go back. And also on the European Transport Conference, which is in September in Milan. If Paul's still in the call, can you give us an overview?
Yes, I'm still here. Yes, we have 15 out of 16 papers accepted, so more or less twice the number of system dynamics related paper than in last year's ETC. We have 3 sessions which are system dynamics stream only, and we have 3 joint sessions with the freight and logistics stream, in which also system dynamics related papers will be presented. It was a bit difficult to find topics for the system dynamics only session. So one was termed mobility on Wednesday, and the other 2 mobility transition. The content is a bit mixed, but I think all of them are very interesting, and the quality of the abstract was quite high. And the other joint sessions about decarbonizing freight, autonomous freight and freight modes, and urban freight simulations cover all 3 days of the conference.
Great, thank you, Paul. So the booking is still open for the conference if you're interested in going. I think the early bird discounts have ended, but you can buy single day tickets as well if you can't make it for the full 3 days. And it's taking place at the Politecnico Milano, same place as it was last year, if anybody is aware of that. We will be hoping going forward that we'll still have the System Dynamics Society Conference and the European Transport Conference. For those of you who are new and you aren't on our mailing list yet, I will say at the end of this session how to join our mailing list, but we will be sending out reminders about the abstract submission process, which is usually towards the start of the year. I think both of them have a sort of similar deadline in that they release the call for papers sort of December, January, with a closure in sort of February time, and you find out in May or June if you're accepted. So we'd really encourage you to consider submitting to that so we can keep our presence up, and it's a great way for us to actually meet in person with that extra added value. Which on that front, I'd like to open up a discussion on our workshop for next year. So this is our sort of annual meeting. And as I said at the start, when we started these, we did do them as a sort of 2-day, 1.5-day workshop. We did one in Vienna that Astrid and Paul hosted for us. And then Simon and I hosted one in Leeds. We'd like to get back to that format. We haven't been able to manage it so far. We did do a survey earlier in the year asking people's interests in whether they'd want to go to an in-person workshop. And I think there's interest there, but we have to provide some extra added value for it. So I'm going to open up the floor and ask people to share any thoughts that they might have on an in-person workshop for next year. I'll just stop sharing my screen as well so we can see people. So, anybody got any thoughts? Generally, would people prefer an in-person meeting, or would they prefer just sessions online like this? No one's willing to commit. You can put it in the chat. Astrid, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just going forward. I really would like to see an in-person event again. I think organizing this year was a little bit difficult with people not really agreeing where it should be. And we have very attractive destinations, but also the issue of getting there. But if we can kind of get this early on, I think it would be a great opportunity to see people. But also, what you can't do in this online session is, for example, afterwards, take one of the PhD students, say, oh, let's talk about your PhD further, or one of the consultants and say, oh, I had another question. So this kind of informal networking would be really, really nice to have again.
Yes, I agree very much there. Enzo, you up next.
Hi to all. A short comment. Of course, I really wish to host finally this workshop in Palermo because we organized this virtually in Palermo due to the COVID and so on. Back on the issue in present or online, as you correctly say, we need to provide net value to be physically in a place. So, apart the time to discuss deeper the aspect, which I think in present will help to some extent. As an academia, I would suggest to issue the call probably earlier than we used to do or we did in the past, and to link this call for paper for possible publication. I know that that was a really hard work when we collaborate, Gillian, in the past to publish a special issue with the journal Simulation. We can find another outlet, and if we work in due time, this can be a good opportunity, I guess. So if we plan more in advance, there will be more chance to have people to opt for in-presence rather than online. Even we can open a window also for a format, a hybrid format. Nowadays, many conferences are in this option as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Enzo. So that's you volunteering Palermo again.
Yes, definitely. I would say yes, and again yes.
Excellent, thank you, Barry.
Someone who's relatively new to the system dynamics piece coming from transport, I would kind of echo the hybrid piece would be great. It just makes it much easier for those of us who kind of want to dip in to follow. I do agree, though, there is huge value in having FaceTime and actual time to talk about things in more detail with when you see stuff that's good. So I think if you can support a hybrid model, that would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
We worked quite closely with the OECD team on their work in transport on the integrating system dynamics with kind of classic 4-stage modeling. So it was quite an interesting experience for us doing that. So it's great to be exposed to it here.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining, Barry. I'm glad that you could, and definitely a hybrid format would be something we're looking at. And we discussed when we're planning this last year. I know that people have had mixed experiences with hybrid type events.
Yeah, it's very tricky.
Yes, so yeah. I think a difficulty there is ensuring that both sides get a quality experience. That it's not just that we are videoing a room for the people joining online, but they can actually also get involved as well.
If they want to get. No, I just think it just creates a greater opportunity for experience, for interaction and for exposure. And we, as wearing a different hat, I'm the chair of the Transport Planning Society in Ireland, and we wrestle with that, where we can get 30 people into a room reasonably well for events. But when we have it online, and all of our hybrid events have been a complete mess, just to be clear, but when we go online with even on a hybrid, we do get up to 100. So it allows for a greater exposure to some of the fantastic work that's done. And I was very taken by some of the stuff related to, say, system dynamics around fleet and fleet change, because we're working on that for as part of our work in climate and carbon reduction. So the other thing is, I think you kind of have to reflect the whole climate thing. You have to allow for people not to make that choice.
Yes, that was definitely one of our concerns as well. And one thing that we've discussed previously is that it wouldn't necessarily that we do a workshop in person every year and expect people to travel. That there would be some sort of alternating between online only and in person.
Yeah, but I'm very tempted by Enzo's offer of Palermo. I think it would be lovely to be in Palermo.
Well, I think that's part of the added value part of where how you do an in-person workshop, do it somewhere attractive is going to help with that.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Barry, for that contribution. In terms of the timing of the workshop, in the past we've done them generally around April. This is generally because this is university holidays. Well, I say holidays. We're not getting holidays. The students are on holiday, so we're not timetabled in to teach. Is anyone got any thoughts on that sort of time frame? Does outside academia, is there any restrictions around the sort of April window? I think we try to avoid what would be school holidays, but that's not always possible because there'll be school holidays somewhere all the time around Easter. But I think, well, unless anyone's got any objections, I think we'd probably be aiming for that for next year again.
It would be also a question for Enzo when it's room availability, etc. at the university.
Yeah, thank you, Astrid and Gillian. I was just say 2 comments on this. Concerning availability of rooms, I think the ideal period is June, July, and September. In terms of traveling cost, I think June could be much better than July and September. Another good period could be end of September. And this can be considered a season, not really a low season, it's like medium season. But if you book in advance your flight, then the cost will be affordable. But for sure, in terms of the rooms available, can be an ideal period. Although we can plan this also in April, when there is the Easter break. But again, if you plan traveling close to Easter, then the flight tickets can be higher than in other periods. So I think in order to be attractive, we need also to compete with these, let's say, external factors as well.
Yeah, thank you for that insider knowledge, Enzo. And that might be extra attractive for people as well if it's around the sort of summer holiday period, if they want to stay for an extra week.
So I can say that June, even the end of September, is a good time to go to the sea and to enjoy Mondello's beach, apart of the food that you can find good food all over the year. But if you want to join the summer time, I think June will be not so hot as well as the end of September, and not so crowded as July and August. So
yes, us Northern Europeans wouldn't want it too hot. Wouldn't be able to work in that heat. And in terms of content within the workshop, I think also having some sort of exercise between the participants, whether that's learning a new technique or looking at a new area, would be something important. It's that why are we actually here in person, not just to enjoy the beach. And I've offered before that we could look at doing a Lego workshop with as part of that is something different. It's still very much a trial and progress, and we'd have to look at logistics of getting the Lego out there, because it comes in about 5 massive boxes, and to wherever we go. And the colleague that I actually do it with from the business school, but and I'm not saying it has to be like that, but would that be of interest? Does anyone have another option that they'd like to suggest? Not seeing anything on that front. Generally have a think about it, then, everyone, and let me know what you'd like around that, and what sort of speakers that we would like. If we want anyone very high profile to come and talk to us, again, in terms of planning, we'd have to get that in fairly early.
I must say I find the topic of this exploratory modeling and analysis quite interesting. For me, it was relatively new.
Yes, the work Quackel and Prout, it's Delft, isn't it?
Yeah, and Eric Voigt. So maybe also the general topic of how to sell this uncertainty, also what Marcus said, the kind of reluctance of civil servants around this topic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do we still have any of the people from the consultancy background online? Is there anything in particular that would interest you to attend an in-person workshop along those lines? I guess that you're in a different position that I would guess, being consultancy, you'd have to have a good reason for the management why you go to an event like this, other than it just being interesting and expanding horizons. So is there a sort of bottom line about whether you'd be able to attend, or what you'd need to attend rather than something online?
Yeah, to really discuss on how to put the theory into practice. That is most interesting for us, I would believe. But yeah, I think such discussions are possible at the ETC, and the ETC is a physical event, of course.
Yeah.
So if it's about sharing knowledge, I think it works to do it digitally. But if you really want to discuss what you can do with this, it's better to do it physically.
Mm-hmm. So would you need an actual session rather than people just presenting on their work, an actual sort of facilitated discussion session between people? Or?
Yeah, well, both, because you need the presenting of the work also to obtain the desired knowledge in order to have a good discussion afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's mixed. It's both sharing knowledge, but yeah, if the focus is more on discussing, which it should be, if we want to put this theory into practice and how to explore the opportunities, I think that would not be possible digitally.
Yeah. Thank you, Martijn. I think Marco also had your hand up.
Yeah, I think I concur with Martijn for that. And what is happening with us now is that we're looking into a revival of the SUMP process, a sustainable urban mobility planning methodology, which will be promoted more severely by the EU the coming years. They're rewriting the SUMP manual, as I understood. Maybe trying to investigate whether this type of policy analysis, problem analysis, explorative modeling could be part of such a policy-making process, and how could you integrate this idea into a SUMP cycle? Might be a topic that could be explored with, also with people from, for example, the EU or Polis or whatever. Because the struggling with exploring futures is one of the hard points in this type of.
Yeah, and having that consensus, I guess, over it as well. I know that we've had colleagues from European Commission join us before. Well, myself when I worked there, but also since then. I think it was the Leeds in-person workshop. We had some people from the European Commission actually connected to the trilateral impact assessment group. So we've had links with them in the past, and with through Polis as well, with a paper that I worked with for them. So having that broad overview of I suppose having all the different stakeholders in the room to get all the different perspectives almost is what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Seen a message in the chat there from Laurel. I would be interested if some SD people use dynamic programming with SD, and especially with Vensim. So, and are you meaning there that if there's some actual programming going on in an event, so you can get some hands-on experience and actually see how to use Vensim or maybe other technologies? I guess one of the things that we could look at is, I know both Goudapple and WSP have their sort of dashboard and online tools that they mentioned, and maybe actually doing a proper live demonstration of that, so we can actually get hands-on and see how that works, share the experiences on how those tools were developed as well. I know I've been involved in research projects in the past that we've talked about having these front ends and what's sort of client friendly within that might be of interest to some people. Enzo.
Yes, Gillian, about this, since a few years, I switched from PowerSim, since I use since a long time ago, to Stella. Stella Architect, which I personally found a really very powerful tool, specifically to build the online interfaces, because there is a really an immediate switch, just save as, and then you have published the simulator online. So as I do have very good relationship with the company, I can get them involved to give a presentation or to find somewhere to get them part of the workshop. I think they will be very interesting to come up and make some presentation and to run some session to demonstrate how to use the tool also on a web interface, if this can be helpful for participants.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I've had a look at Stella myself, and never really got into it. And I think it is just an idea of, well, I use Vensim and I'll stick with what I know. I've also looked at using AnyLogic as well. And that was specifically because I know you could use that to link with agent-based modeling. So maybe it could be a case that we can reach out to a number of different programming softwares, and in the interests of trying to be neutral towards all of them, and we can have a vote at the end of the day which one we all like the most, which one's going to be the common tool in system dynamics and transport.
Absolutely. I'm not supporting any of this, but I support all of them.
Indeed, as long as you're using something. But it would be useful to know the other ones and what their different functionalities are, and whether we're using the right one for us. Having that space to be able to look at something and discuss it with users.
I'm just thinking, I think it will be interesting to challenge them, show a kind of their best application in the theme of the workshop, not just the software per se, which could be, something that can be fascinating on the technical point of view. But I like what has been said before. So knowledge sharing and put the theory in practice. Yeah. So why don't we challenge also this different companies to say, okay, we would like to invite you, but come and show one of your best applications using your platform in this theme workshop. So in order to link the theme of the workshop to the presentation, rather than to have a kind of a technical presentation per se that you can easily find on the web or YouTube or any other video platform nowadays. Yeah, I mean, it's just a reflection. I mean,
yeah, perfect. Thanks, Enzo, for that. Zainab.
I don't know if there are someone who would be interested in this or would like to prefer a more neutral technical presentation on the software company. Just if you would like to have the more specific application or using the software platform, please just let us know, and just just a short poll, a quick poll, just to have an idea, or you prefer the more technical presentation on the use of the software. Just let us know. I mean, the goal is to have a workshop that is useful for all participants, not just for a few of them. Thank you very much. Or you can write in the chat.
Yes. Comments in the chat, please, of what you might prefer around that. As you're the ones who are here today, you're more likely to be the ones interested in coming to the workshop itself. So we really value your contributions. Zainab, I think you had your
Yes, I would like to add something from PhD student maybe perspective. Here in Sweden, actually, we don't have enough support in, I can say that, in senior system dynamic modeler, especially in transportation or in all the area. So I mean, if we can have some kind of, I don't know, platform or networking group or something that we could be in contact like with other expert or something like this. This would be one idea, and another idea could be like having PhD students themselves a group to meet each other, because for example, I and Claudia work in Sweden like KTH, and then we couldn't find really senior people that can help us. And sometimes in the modeling, you have a specific question that you have to explore like 2 weeks just to, that is like a special question. But if some senior people were there, they could just tell you, okay, just test this one, maybe it will be solved. So I mean, from PhD student perspective, I think that it could be very useful if we have this community, this network of the more senior people, that we are like easy to ask question or something like, so we are in touch with them somehow.
Yeah, thanks for that, Zainab. So we do have something like that, in that we have the mailing list, which anyone can send an email on, and it will go out to our 200-300 members. We also have the LinkedIn group where you can post things on. However, I am aware that they're not fully engaged in. I check LinkedIn every so often, and usually when I've just got something coming up that I need to put on. In terms of the mailing list, although I say anyone can send an email through it, I think I'm the only one who does, or somebody else from the T-SIG when we are advertising something. So that's something we could use a lot better. I'll definitely agree with you on that. We've also got set up through the System Dynamics Society a Stack account. Again, not something I use very well, but by all means do try engage in that way and see what you can get back. And on the back of that, if you're interested in an actual PhD students, or maybe even some master's students as well, sort of network, particularly in SD and transport, I would encourage you to set one up. Send an email out on the mailing list, say any PhD students want to get together, we can support you in that. We've a very limited amount of funds, but we might be able to get some funds from the SD Society, but we can definitely support you through the platforms that we have. And that's the kind of thing that would be much better if it is student-led. You will know what you want and how to communicate. But if that is something you're interested in, please get in touch directly with us, and we can help you get it set up, or email out to the group and see who's out there. Astrid, was your hand related to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to raise awareness. There is a free student organized SD colloquium at the International System Dynamics Conference. And there is a kind of student organization, and you could kind of also contact them if you said there might be an interested in a subgroup doing transport. So first of all, the colloquium is online and hybrid this year. You can enter for free. And if you enter early, you can get an angel advisor, experienced system dynamics modeler who gives you direct feedback. But it could also be a good idea to kind of network with these people if you say, well, we have a subgroup interested in transportation applications.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think you put the link in the chat, didn't you?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So regarding the PhD colloquium that Astrid mentioned before, so last year I joined this free PhD colloquium, and I found this really interesting and helpful. So I also share some materials with other PhD students from other universities. So Zainab, I would like and love to connect with you, because I'm also doing my PhD right now. So we can start these connections, or like this kind of PhD group from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanaz, for that. Yeah, having a chat with anyone who's been involved in these before. I know they've got a lot out of it. My PhD student went to the summer school last year and found it very useful. And maybe that's something that we can promote more on our mailing lists as well. And sort of linking back to the actual idea of an in-person workshop, having a specific PhD session or student session there, and you know, increasing their profile, so introducing students to more senior SD modelers. So it might be someone that you've read a paper by or you've heard of, but maybe haven't got the confidence to approach. Being able to meet them at a workshop obviously breaks down some of those barriers. So we've got that added bonus. Right. Anybody got any other thoughts on a workshop for next year or activities related to that? I'll be sending out an email after this and asking people to commit to getting involved in organising this going forward. So all useful ideas, but we'll need someone to take ownership of it. So that's the next sort of question as well. Okay, other things that we had on the agenda was also to discuss a webinar series. So like the one that Paraffin did for last year, if there is a topic that somebody has a particular interest in that wants to take the lead on arranging, this one, I think it was the first Tuesday of a month for 4 or 5 months, that again, we can support, and that the System Dynamics Society can provide the Zoom platform and record it and make it available for us on our YouTube again. It could be something that's linked to the workshop or linked to the idea of a special issue of a journal, to have it something more engaging in that way, maybe leading up to the workshop so people can meet or get an idea of things before. I've not got any particular ideas of my own at the moment on that. Is there any particular topics that anybody has that they'd like to be covered? Say the last one was on qualitative modelling and participatory practices. No?
Maybe we need a little think and call for topics.
Yes, yeah. Going forwards on that. Or maybe that's the thing that we could even focus around PhDs to get a PhD network started. Is if we're particularly looking at, you know, what's at the forefront of PhDs in system dynamics and transport at the moment, and then maybe it could be more of a session where PhD students are sharing problems and we match up with more senior or experts in that area.
Otherwise, I think in our case, we have 2 big topic areas. One was around this whole logistics from Partner Institute. The other big one at the moment is, or 3 maybe, the other one is micromobility and new forms of mobility integration. And the third one is certainly this energy transition, both in passenger as in freight. As topics, it's not so much methodological, it's more the topic area.
Yeah. Then we can start to focus around that. Okay.
I don't know if you mentioned, Astrid, could be also a link between transportation, climate change issue, or CO2 emission reduction as well. Which is a hot topic today, and there are also multiple projects going on this topic as well. So we'll encourage you to have also this dimension included. I don't know if we want to link also to the SDGs somehow. That can be a framework that could be cover multiple aspects in respect also to the previous observation concerning the theory and practice. probably we should think about this on how to link the transportation issue to SDGs, and then we can have multiple themes based on some of SDGs goal. It doesn't mean all of them, but some of them can be really strongly related to our research areas.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Enzo. I hadn't thought of SDGs. In terms of emissions and climate, that is something that we could roll up with the energy transitions that Astrid brought up for sure. And these are the sort of the main areas that you see coming through time and again in our abstracts. We've always got like sustainable urban mobility, energy transitions, logistics. Those are the ones. I think the other one, and it might be because I do a lot of work in it myself, is sort of connected and shared mobility as well.
Yeah, the reason why I say SDGs because they are by nature, they are multidisciplinary. And we do come from multiple areas, so this can accommodate the topic in a comfortable zone for all of us. So although I come from the area of management, it works, but if we put this on an engineering perspective, it works as well, and so on. So and this can be also a hot topic that today we can propose for an outlet to issue a special number, so special issue. So I think this can be a broad topic on a side, can accommodate multiple actors as well, practitioners and academics, and can be also good for a journal. Let's see.
Yeah, I agree, and it gives an opportunity of giving a different perspective on things. There was, in fact, my Lego work came out from, it was originally supposed to be related to the SDG related to migration. So it can make people sort of think of their work in a different frame, and therefore be more creative and come up with some new ideas. So yeah. Okay. Next that we had was that if we had teaching down as our next point, because we sometimes share ideas on teaching. I know that we've shared our teaching materials before, but I haven't got anything particularly prepared for this, but I wanted to just raise it in case that anyone has had some innovation in their teaching or supervision practices around system dynamics, or have seen some best practice that they're thinking about using, anything that they'd like to share in the realm of teaching and supervision of system dynamics.
Not the best practice, but least best practice. We are still struggling with finding small, interesting transport-related models that students can develop. So something that has an interesting feedback mechanism is not too big for student work to learn system dynamics. So if anybody has ideas, we are really still struggling with that. Students are a bit, master students, I mean, overwhelmed with having to build a system dynamics model from scratch.
Yes, yeah, I think we could reflect that to some extent. I mean, we've used the Pokemon Go model as a sort of feeder for people to start doing the Struben model, but been finding that we ask them to complete it for us. Some of them give it a really good try, but generally we have to give them the model for them to build on. I did look at the is it the Neuenhausen one with the connected and automated mobility. The problem with that is because it's got the 5 levels and they're subscripted, and then the agent chains actually gets really quite complicated. So doing a more simplified version of that, I agree. I mean, we've got I assume you're just talking in terms of simulation models and not CLDs.
No, the CLD works fine.
Yeah.
We have a very interesting group. We also teach it beyond transport, and we do get really good results from this course. But then the next step to put this into a simulation model, a lot of people struggle.
Yes. Maybe that's something again to think about for an in-person workshop as well between us. Can we create a simple model that can be used in teaching? And not just in teaching, but for, you know, one thing I've been working on is trying to just get a really simple model on mode choice to use just to test out some things around health that I'm looking at. So I've kind of worked back from Mars and made myself a very simple model that's questionable in some ways. But if we could get a standard one that we all use, not just for teaching, but also for simple demonstrations, that might be something to aim towards.
I mean, that's the nice thing with the UDM model online. You can use it for some simple things for people to test out and get a feel for using a model, but you don't see what's behind it, of course.
Yes, yeah, that's the problem, is actually that properly understanding how it all fits together. Okay. Well, I'm putting this into my notes, and I'll be emailing around the mailing list as well, and that'll be one of the sort of action points that we'll see if anyone can engage in, maybe someone who isn't here today, or something to take forward. Thanks, Astrid. Right, so last main point is just a sort of any other business, any other suggestions, any other interest of what we should be doing as a T-SIG going forward. I think we've covered most things that we've discussed before.
Maybe something that is also something to discuss in a workshop with PhD students is, what are good journals to aim for? Which journals are willing to accept, for example, qualitative system dynamics work, or which journals are good to use for quantitative. I mean, we see some publications, and we could just say those are journals which are relevant, but I think it might be good for PhD students to get some help on this, and maybe also for ourselves.
Yes, and just something that I've thought on the back of that is, I suppose with which journal, how much information you put in about the basics of system dynamics, how much do you need to explain for the reader, or what is the best text to refer to? I mean, I'm constantly just quoting John Sturman, but or just referring to System Dynamics Society. So yeah, so something around that I think would be, as you said, useful for PhDs, but useful for all of us.
At least from academia.
Yes. Brilliant. Thanks, Astrid. Okay, well, if I've not got anything else, for anyone who's still on the line who is new to us, well done for sticking on. I'm just putting a link in the chat to the email address, the sort of generic email address. I actually manage it, but for the Transport SIG, if you have any questions, anything we've talked about today that you'd like to get involved with, you are more than welcome. Please come along, take ownership over something. We're quite happy to support you through that, and get involved. I've just realized I've completely misspelt dynamics in that, and obviously that should be systemdynamics.org, not systemdynamics.org.
But a little bit of gym is not always a bad idea.
Yes, indeed. And finally, there's just another link for you there, which is hopefully spelt right, which is just a feedback form on the event today. If you've got any thoughts on how it went, what you'd like to see differently, how else you'd like to get engaged, that is all. And I think there's a link in there for you to put in your email address, contact details, if you do want to work more closely with us. So I think finally, before I close, we're closing 10 minutes early, so that's exciting as well. I'd like to thank our 3 consultancy speakers from this morning. I know that at least some, if not all of them, have had to drop off already, but Mike Costello from Steer, Martijn Ledijn from Goudapple, and Karim Anzo from WSP, as well as thanking Astrid for chairing the panel session. Also to our PhD students, Zena Rufi from